Brauchler Show. Welcome to those who are viewing on YouTube, those listening wherever you are this morning. You probably guessed by now, I am actually not George Brauchler. I know you guys are great, smart listeners, so I know that you have sensed that in the first few moments. I am Deborah Flora. My show normally heard weekdays 3 to 4. Today, John Caldera is going to be sitting in for me as I am sitting in for my colleague George Brauchler. And my hat is off to him. I've already had 2 cups of coffee, and I know he does this every single day. Hey, but as a mom, I'm used to early morning. So it is good to be with you all. It's good to be with producer Billy in the studio here and the entire team. Great to be with you all by YouTube. What a fun new way to do this, although it did keep me from wearing my baseball cap and letting you know how I really look when I roll out of bed. But that's okay. That's a whole nother story. Good to be with you this morning. We've got a great show ahead. Right now, in this hour, we're going to talk about some of the headlines, some of the Orwellian things I woke up to, and want to hear from you. 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971 after we jump into this. Also love hearing from our listeners on our free 710 KNUS app, so please text away. Always having good conversations during the week. And, coming up later in the show, in the second hour, we're going to have with us Adam Andrzejewski. He is the founder and director of OpenTheBooks.com. Man, does he have some stuff. He has opened those books. He's uncovered a lot of things that really a lot of people don't want you to know, including how much Dr. Fauci's wealth increased during the shutdown. Probably not surprising to you, but we got the facts. He's also got some great statements about the waste of the week, where our hard-earned tax dollars is going. Here's the most important thing. A lot of his reports have actually become action in the form of hearings. They are going to be feeding a lot of the hearings that are going to start happening now that we will have taken back the House of Representatives starting in January. Then in hour 3 and 8 o'clock hour, we're going to be joined by former Congressman and Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, good friend of ours. We've known him for quite a while. We're going to talk about what's going on with the military recruitment crisis. Hopefully something that's going to turn that around, which is the movement to stop the vaccine mandate for our military and a couple of other things. We're also going to talk about national security issues, what's happening at the border. Allen West always has some really great insight. And then in the final hour, going to be taking calls from you. I'm also going to be talking about one of my pet peeves, which I call the war on childhood. We're going to talk about how we can be the new Guardians in lieu of the film Rise of the Guardians. But don't worry about that. We've got a few hours to get to that conversation. I want to kick it off by talking about some of the headlines. And I tell you, I woke up to one that was a long time coming, and so grateful it's here. I'm going to lead up to that. It has to do with Iran. I'm going to lead up to that, first of all, by saying Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. This is the season. I love it. Every chance I get to say that to people. Our family celebrates Christmas, but I know Hanukkah is starting this Sunday. And I had a flashback to 2020. One of the most overlooked achievements of the last administration was the Abraham Accords. Absolutely historic. While many different administrations have talked about peace, have talked about the Middle East, etc., whether or not people, are fans of Donald Trump, this is one thing that I felt like he was overlooked actually for the Nobel Peace Prize. And here's the reason why. As many of you remember, the Abraham Accords being named after Abraham, who is one figure in history that is claimed by Muslim, Jewish, and Christians all alike, a common ground that they can stand on. There was an accord between the Arab nations and Israel, and it was with the UAE. It was an amazing thing, and it led to what I called on my show in 2020, December 15th, the Hanukkah miracle. So when people are singing hymns of peace on earth, goodwill towards all mankind, there was a beautiful moment 2 years ago for Hanukkah, and that was when there was the lighting of the menorah by the Western Wall, and it was on December 15th, 2020. And who was there? Not just Orthodox rabbis, Israelis, but members of the UAE and Bahrain. That was a moment that really was historic. And too often we can forget those achievements and hope that we can continue to work that way. I think there's a lot going on in the Middle East where people will be joining together because Iran is becoming so threatening. That leads me to the headline that I said was a long time overdue. So in light of everything that's going on, as we've been seeing, there's the riots happening in Iran, also China. Tomorrow, by the way, Helen Raleigh is going to be joining me. She is an expert on what's going on in China, born and raised in China. She is an editor at The Federalist and writes numerous articles about this. We're going to talk about that because it's inspiring to know what one person can do to set a spark. Well, the person that set the spark in Iran is actually, unfortunately, someone who passed away. And that is, you probably remember, in September, what happened was the death of Mahsa Amini. She's a young Kurdish woman. She was a young Kurdish woman who was arrested by the morality police. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about in this first hour is very Orwellian. The things that people name organizations or even just they're hearkening back to so many things out of 1984. The morality police. Why did they arrest her? Because apparently her hair was not perfectly covered according to their strict Islamic laws. So they arrested her. She died in custody. Now, preceding this, something that a lot of people may not know, by the way, if you're just getting to know me, my show is 3 to 4 on weekdays. Deborah Flora. I did grow up here in Colorado. I have to say this before I tell you the other part of the story so you don't think I'm an invading Californian. I grew up here in Colorado on Lowry Air Force Base, but I did have temporary insanity when I went to Hollywood. I was an actress. I always let people know I'm now a recovered actress in my left brain and my right mind. But while I was there, and then I met my husband there also, we met several amazing people that were doing amazing work. There's a gentleman named Cyrus Nowrasteh. He and his wife, Betsy, created a movie called The Stoning of Soraya M. And it's a hard to watch movie. It's very hard to watch, but I tell you, it is a must watch movie. And especially for any of your friends who may be radical liberal feminists, let's give them a new cause by seeing how women are treated around the world. It's based on a true story. Well, they wrote this, and Cyrus's background is that he is from Iran. And he then was able to come to America. He wrote this because of what happened. And in it, there is a stoning of a woman, and it's not ancient history. It's recent history. There was actually a woman, Soraya M., who was stoned to death. Brutal way to die. You look at some of these things, and you couldn't tell whether it was in the 1600s, the 400s, or today by how barbaric it was. That movie has been circulating in Iran now ever since it was created. And while it did not get major reception here in the United States of America for many reasons. Number one, it's hard to watch because it's beautifully shot. It's an important story, but it's a tough story. But also because, of course, critics don't like anything that isn't basically towing the party line. So its real purpose is what it has been doing within Iran itself. It is not by chance that this was talking about the horrific treatment of women. And then it is the death of this young Kurdish woman, Mahsa Amini, a Kurdish woman who was killed in custody after the morality police arrested her for not wearing her hijab, I believe it was, correctly. Well, that set off some protests, as we've been seeing. This could be the very thing that topples this government. It could also make them even more dangerous because sometimes someone who is cornered becomes even more dangerous. I heard Mike Pompeo and others talking about that. But here's where this leads. First of all, what was Biden's response? Unfortunately, characteristically weak. Fell far short from in any way condemning this regime. Here's my other question. Where are the U.S. feminists, by the way? Because anyone who thinks that there's a war on women here in the United States of America, I am a woman. I don't have a war on me. I am grateful for those who have gone before. So I can sit here today talking to you on the air. But they're silent about these things. For instance, they're silent about what happened in Afghanistan right after the botched exit. And within a week or two, what's the Taliban doing? They're arresting any woman who is not dressed in full Islamic Sharia garb. Well, back to Iran. This is growing. And Iran recently said that they suspended their morality police, which was just absolutely a bait and switch. Because what did they do right afterwards? They began executing those young people who have been standing up. And some of their chants, by the way, have been women, life, freedom. The first person that they executed was a 23-year-old Mohsen Shikari. And it was the first official execution in the wake of these protests that were really fairly unprecedented under this pretty harsh regime. And a reporter in the area said that Mohsen gave his life for freedom. He wanted a normal life, one more brave soul killed by this bloody regime. That was not the end of it. They then, on Monday, killed a second protester, and it's going to probably go on. This last protester was hanged publicly from a construction crane. Now, why am I talking about this in light of a headline today? I have been waiting for this for a long time. I remember quite a few years ago when Iran was first allowed to be on the UN Women's Rights Commission. Now, if that is not the height of hypocrisy and showing what is absolutely, completely flawed with the UN, I don't know what is. Here's what is stunning. So this mistreatment of women isn't new. They are treated as though they are chattel, as though they are owned. They have no rights, so to speak, in Iran. And what has happened was in 2021, 43 out of 54 of the participating countries voted to put Iran on the Women's Rights Commission for 4 more years. That was inexcusable at the time. And even some people from the Obama administration have faulted Biden for not taking a stance. This morning, one of the first good news things to wake up to, which is nice, Iran was ousted finally from the UN Women's Rights Council. 29 out of 54 participating countries voted to oust Iran. Now, this was led by the U.S., grateful for that. But of course, who voted against it was Russia and China. Why? Because if we are not paying attention, we being the United States of America, there's a lot of cozying up that is going on with Russia, China, and Iran. It's interesting how throughout history, those who are really pretty much totalitarian regimes tend to join together. Birds of a feather join together, and this is certainly the case. So that's good news. I am actually really, really glad to hear that. Long overdue, and especially when brave souls are standing for freedom in Iran. And what are they chanting? Women, life, freedom. I tell you, this holiday, if you're going to be sitting across the table from any one of your relatives that is thinking that the fact that women have to actually pay, $8 for birth control at Target is somehow a violation of our women's rights, just remind them of their sisters around the world who are really suffering. So that's some good news. So lots of headlines to share. I'm talking a little bit about how some of them are very Orwellian, which tends to be the case. But you know what? I want to ask my good friend, Billy. Billy, what's the headline that's gotten your attention? And we're going to let Billy get on.
Yeah. To put on the headphones. Hello.
What got your attention this morning?
Elon Musk banning the account that is following his plane. I think that is interesting. And something that I thought was going to happen as soon as he announced that he was taking over Twitter. I figured it was only a matter of time until that went away. He hasn't liked it, and now he's got the controls. Yeah, it went away, which, again, as Matt Drudge points out this morning, does just make him a very, very rich hypocrite. But that's okay. He is rich enough to be a hypocrite. Go right ahead. But for the free speech absolutist, that is an interesting play. But well,
and here's one thing I do find interesting, and I don't completely disagree with you. I think it's different when you possibly put out people's locations. What I would like of that account was it was telling who was flying in their private jets and where they were landing. This account did many of other people beyond Elon Musk, and I do think we should know who is flying in private jets that's possibly flying to a global warming climate change conference. Here's the only thing I would say different. One of the things I do understand is his 2-year-old son was just the car was actually just stopped by a fairly crazy person who thought that Elon Musk was in it. And I got to say, as a parent, if someone gets in front of your children, it does make you take things a little bit more seriously. I actually had a stalker for a little while. I always say that, when you're in Hollywood, you need your headshots, you got your agent, you got your manager, you got your stalker. Kind of goes with the territory. But that redacting a lot of stuff, including where I lived and especially where my children were. So I can see both sides of this one, Billy. I do think, share a lot of his other details, but location is something that's can be a little dangerous in the times that we're in.
Well, I understand the point, but I think that we are being myopic. Because when you and I were growing up, there was a company that used to deliver a giant yellow book onto your doorstep that doxed everybody in town.
That's a great point.
You had to go to that company and ask them specifically to not publish your address and your telephone number. So now the idea that people know where I live, shut up. That's how we grew up. And the idea that Musk went and basically prevented this Twitter account to run. Remember, he's a free speech absolutist. That is the background that is most important in this conversation, because Elon has another opportunity to ban that guy from finding out where he's flying. For over a decade, there has been the ability to mask your FAA tail sign. And you have that ability that only the FAA has that. It is not difficult to obtain, and it is publicly available. Any private plane can do it. And the fact that Elon doesn't, but makes this type of a statement. Remember, when he was taking over Twitter, he also proudly said, wow, look, I'm not banning this account. And then he turned out less than 4 weeks later and banned it. This is performative BS. This just goes in line with all the wrong reasons for him buying the company in the first place. It is phenomenally fun to watch, but Elon has no idea what he's doing with Twitter. He may figure it out, and he may actually fix it, but right now, he doesn't have a clue what he's doing, and it is entertaining to watch.
It is entertaining. I do think Elon Musk is a gift that keeps on giving. I mean, what I want for Christmas is more people to take over things like Facebook so we can see what's really going on. The one thing I would say, and I don't disagree with you on the absolute of the principle, but we live in very different times. I remember growing up where we could just go on down the street and we'd be out and our parents had no way of knowing where we were. There were no cell phones. There was none of that. But part of it is times have changed drastically. It seems like the increase in craziness has increased. That's redundant, obviously, but craziness has increased. So I can see a little bit protecting your kids, but you're right. Start by masking your plane's location. Well,
I'd be curious about your statement that craziness has increased. I don't see any empirical evidence. We do have more people. And so of more people, there would then consequently be more crazy people. But as an instance of someone, a larger group of people being crazy, I don't see any empirical evidence. What we do is we hyperdiagnose things. So we have more diagnoses. But the idea that we have a larger percentage of the population that is diagnosed as quote unquote crazy, I disagree with that premise. I don't think it can be backed up empirically.
Well, I think it's interesting. And I don't have the data in front of me. I'll try to come in with that tomorrow. But I do remember the very first mass murder in a way that people remember was in cold blood. It was so shocking that a book was written about it, a movie, because nothing like that had happened before, at least as was known, a stranger walking in, killing an entire family. Then we had Columbine. Nothing like that had really happened before. And I had 2 nephews in Columbine when it happened. So I remember how shocking it was. So I do think there is an increase of this kind of activity.
Well, that's different, though. That kind of activity is different than crazy. They're not necessarily analogous, and this is the reason, and this is the thing that everybody forgets in the idea when you bring up Columbine as that example. Everyone uses this and ignores this fact. The vast majority of people that have perpetrated mass shootings are not crazy. They have not been diagnosed that way. So saying they're crazy, you're conflating 2 issues. And so that's not necessarily fair in the conversation. The conversation is whether or not we have more crazy people and not more mass shootings. Those are different.
Yeah, there's actually a very interesting study, and then we're going to head to a break, but I love this kind of conversation. There's an interesting study that shows the predominant number of these young men, predominantly young men who commit these heinous acts, have been on some sort of antidepressant medication. There is a link. I'll find the study for tomorrow because we're going to continue this conversation, Billy.
With fairness, does antidepressants make you crazy?
There are studies that show when it reaches to a certain level, it actually changes someone's behavior. So crazy is a loose term. It's the morning. Maybe we can call it, depressed. We can call it whatever the person is dealing with.
I think it's a problem that we have in this conversation, that when we're talking about the idea of, and again, we've gone far afield based on where we started with Elon Musk. But when we deal with the idea of mass shootings, we always say, oh gosh, the people are crazy, when the majority of them are not diagnosed that way. We can agree that it takes something strange or off kilter to walk into a large situation and want to kill as many people as possible. But that being diagnosed, as we qualify that as crazy today, doesn't necessarily fit.
Well,
it doesn't
and
fit the definition.
I don't think it means crazy as George has been so good at doing, not letting someone off just on an insanity plea. However, there is something that has shifted in our culture that's deeply wrong. You can trace it back to so many things that we're not going to sort out just this morning, from a lot of issues that you see that is common with these young men at home to really the vast majority of them. There's an interesting story in the Epic Times, have been on this particular type of antidepressant that can lead to homicidal thoughts. That's actually in the description for the medication. So whatever it is, but getting back to the thing with Elon Musk, I think that we do live in times where people are much more aware of the risk. And I guess it's more personal. Having been a woman who had someone that was threatening and a stalker, I certainly know that I have done everything in my ability, especially as a parent, to keep people from knowing where I live. And that's my right. Now, the reality is, you're right. There's other things Elon Musk can do. We are going to head to a break because we're going to come back with more of the headlines that are going, some of them Orwellian, some of them from the medical community that you will not believe, and we'll have more lively dialogue. Thank you, Billy. That was a good conversation. As we're heading to the break, once again, if you're just tuning in, I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS, sitting in for George Brauchler. Not George Brauchler, as you probably guessed, but sitting in for him. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll also take some calls, 303-696-1971, if you want to give your thoughts about this, and love hearing from the listeners on our free 710 KNUS app. Don't go anywhere. Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes, all in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Welcome back to the George Brauchler Show. This is not George Brauchler. No, he did not just suddenly start speaking in falsetto. This is Deborah Flora. So happy to be here. Welcome to those of you who are watching on YouTube, those of you who are listening live. Thanks for being a part of the conversation today. My show is heard Monday through Friday, 3 to 4 p.m., but I'm honored to be sitting in this morning for my colleague George. I'll be with you again tomorrow morning, along with producer Billy in the studio. And, there's so much to talk about today. I do want to let you know that coming up at the next hour, 7:10 a.m., we're going to have with us Adam Andrzejewski. He is the founder of OpenTheBooks.com. Man, does he have some information for you? There is definitely a war on transparency. I think you know that from our government. And he's got some interesting information. They have filed so many FOIA requests, gotten so much information. Many of the headlines you see, by the way, are based on what they uncover. And one of the things you're going to find out is just how much Dr. Fauci increased his wealth during the shutdown. Probably not surprised, but we're going to find out the real details as well as some other areas that the government is spending our hard-earned tax dollars and where that is leading to some investigations. Because I am not a litigious person, but I do think one of the beachheads that we have is retaking the House of Representatives in January. Are they going to be perfect? No. Are they going to uncover some things that need to be uncovered? Yes, and I think that is important. Some people I talk to say, oh, you know what, they shouldn't be focusing on investigations. They should be focusing on legislation that is positive. I say, why not do both? Because the reality is, if we do not drag things into the light, nothing will change. No one will be held accountable, and we need to do that. So we are talking, and Billy and I were talking in the last hour a little bit talking about how Elon Musk has now banned a Twitter account that was showing where his jet was. Is that hypocrisy for absolute freedom of speech? I think that there are many things that are absolute, but there are times when safety and security are important. His 2-year-old son was attacked in the car. They thought that Elon Musk was in it. I got to tell you, as a mom who had a stalker, you better believe I began to make sure people did not know where I actually lived or where our children went to school and why I never talk about their names or where they go to school now. So, you can see both sides of it. And I'd love to hear, do you think Billy's right? Do you think it's hypocritical of Elon Musk to ban this Twitter account that is giving his location? 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. We were also talking about how the world is very different from when you would get a telephone book with everybody's addresses in it. That was a day and age where we could run around and run down the street. Nobody knew where you were until you heard your mom yelling from a long distance. I think those days are gone, unfortunately, and it is a time to be more cautious. But I'd love to hear from you about that. And we have Don from Lakewood. Don is calling into the show. Don, thanks so much for being on the George Brauchler Show. This is Deborah Flora.
Good morning.
Good morning. How are you, sir?
If I was any better, I'd be you.
Well, thanks, Don. I have had a lot of coffee. Feeling good this morning. What do you want to tell? Go ahead.
Number 4.
Oh, well.
Hey, I'm probably up at the same time as you were this morning.
Yes.
I get to work early. I met you at the caucus at Alameda High School.
Great.
You were running for office. You came over to the table on your way out the door.
Mm-hmm.
Wish that had worked out a little better for you, but it's what it is.
Don, that makes 2 of us, but thank you so much. It was good to meet you there. I appreciate it.
Hey, you mentioned In Cold Blood,
mm-hmm.
and there were 4 people killed in that family, the Cutler family, I believe.
Yes.
Truman Capote made famous. So, you ever hear of Charlie Starkweather?
It sounds very familiar, but fill me in, Don.
Okay. All right. Well, 1958 in January, he went around my hometown where he grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. I was 6. And he and a gal named Carol Ann Fugate, she was 15. I think he was 17 or 18. He murdered 13 people by the time it was all said and done. He was holed up about a mile away from where I lived. With a wealthy family who he killed some of them, but he'd done some other damage prior to that. And they finally caught him up in Wyoming. He got the electric chair, I think, within a year and a half from that. And there was no diagnosis of him having depression, being nuts. He was a real strange kid growing up there in Lincoln. It was a small town. He was our garbage man for a short period of time.
Right.
So when you talk about all these things going on, we definitely have a lot more people. We have a lot of different pressures, but we also have a lot of digging and prying into what make people tick. And are we doing them a favor by doing all this, or are we making the case for more and more people having excuse for bad behavior?
Well,
consequences.
And that's an interesting question, because there's many things that have changed in our culture, not just, an increase in population. Another caller was texting to the show talking about how, there is more and more violence in video games and movies. And I do think there's such a hypocrisy in Hollywood that wants to take away guns of, law-abiding citizens to protect themselves, and yet is pushing a very violent ideation. And I'm not saying that that is responsible, but certainly people can picture things in their minds that perhaps they couldn't picture before. I also think it's an interesting question. Is someone crazy? Or do we finally acknowledge that there is evil in this world? There is that part of it where people get fixated on something and go in a direction they shouldn't. Give you the last word on that, Don.
Well, I probably have a little different take than a lot of people. I think a lot of what our expectations are based on the culture we know, which we're seeing change in pretty rapid time periods right now compared to other cultures in other countries. Having traveled quite a bit in Asia, a little bit in Europe, a little bit in South America.
In what way do you think our country has changed versus those countries?
Well, first of all, God, the Bible, Christianity. You get around communities that have a different religious belief, they also have different laws of what they consider a violation. You take Indonesia right now. They just made it illegal for having out-of-marriage sex. How do you think that's going to fly?
Probably like Prohibition did.
Well, but what do you remember that kid that got caned for stealing down in Singapore many years ago?
Right.
Like, he might not even be alive then. I don't know.
You're kind. I believe I was.
Everybody was outraged that they were caning this kid. Well, you went to a country just like Brittany Griner. You broke their law.
Right.
And I forget the politics. You broke their law, but here in this country, well, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it.
Yeah,
we're going to slap you. You want to know what's going? The problem is, my mom taught school for 35 years in some underprivileged classes.
Yeah,
and they took away her ability to discipline.
Yeah, no, that's right, Don.
I will leave you with that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and we're heading to a break, Don. But I really appreciate your calling in so much. Thank you. Have a good morning. Don made an interesting point, which is the classrooms, by the way, around our country are much more violent than they've ever been. We talked about this in our documentary, Whose Children Are They? You'll hear a heartbreaking story of a woman who was an award-winning Teacher of the Year who had to finally quit because it was actually under the Obama administration where they saw what they thought was a racial disparity based on how many people of different skin colors were being expelled, and they ended up lowering the rate of expelling, the threshold for that, the threshold for suspending someone in order to correct that. That's once again where you see a statistic and you come to the wrong conclusion. What that has created in our classrooms is pretty much a war zone. And who is that hurting most? It's hurting the students. is hurting those who actually want to go and learn, and there's absolute mayhem and nothing that teachers can do about it. Now, I'm not sure about caning, but we certainly have to be able to have discipline, and it benefits even those children who have the disciplinary issues, because if it goes unchecked, those are oftentimes students who then commit further and further and further issues. And boy, if we just actually were a country of laws that obeyed our laws, imagine how that would stop things. One quick story on 9/11, my husband and I this year were able to be filming with the firefighters, with first responders, several memorials, and we got to sit in Mayor Rudy Giuliani's home and interview him on 9/11. And one of the things, what stopped the crime and the violence in New York when it was out of control, he had a zero tolerance policy. They called it the broken window policy. If you even had one small thing, you would be held accountable for it, because if it didn't, things would get worse and worse and worse and worse. And he turned that city around. I tell you, lax policies all over our country are creating areas where people are just not safe. And we see it. We see it statistically in the crime rates. We're going to head to a break. When we come back, we're going to share some more headlines and share some of the stories. By the way, when our last caller called in about a murder situation in his hometown, I'll tell you the story when we come back about when I was babysitting when Ted Bundy was on the loose. That was something straight out of a horror movie. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll continue on The George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to the George Brauchler Show. This is not George Brauchler. I am Deborah Flora, happy to be sitting in for my colleague George, who is away for the week. My show heard every day during the week, 3 to 4 p.m. Today, John Caldera is going to be sitting in for me as I'm sitting in here because I think my coffee will wear out by 3 o'clock. So, so it's good to be with you today. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to have with us Adam Andrzejewski. He is the founder of OpenTheBooks.com, and he has opened the book. So we are going to be talking a lot about what he's uncovered, and not just because we want to just share outrageous headlines. It is actually leading to real change. Many of the things that OpenTheBooks.com uncovers has led to some of the hearings, is arming those who are uncovering things, including, as I've been saying, how much Dr. Fauci increased his fortune during the shutdown. Probably not surprising, but important to have actual facts and evidence. And that's what Adam does. We're going to talk about that and some other headlines of what he has uncovered. But we've been having an interesting conversation during this hour, going everything from Elon Musk to Iran to mass shootings, etc. It's fun to ping pong around in the 6 o'clock hour. That's what happens when we are waking up. But I wanted to read one comment from a listener who said, we were talking about the mass shootings. Are things getting more dangerous? Are we just more aware of it? My hypothesis is that things are getting more dangerous, that what happened in Columbine, one of the reasons why it took longer for people to go in is because they've never seen anything like that. It had usually been a hostage situation, not something where it was just bent on destruction. And one listener texted that one common denominator with nearly every mass shooter is a fascination with gun-based video games and movies containing violent gun use. My thoughts about that is, yes, I think that helps with an ideation, not helps, it hurts by giving those who are unstable or maybe just plain evil or maybe having some kind of a mental health issue, whatever you want to call it. It gives them an ideation of what they can do. They can see it clearly. The biggest point I want to make about that is there's such a hypocrisy going on in Hollywood. Those who literally want to push for law-abiding citizens to not be able to be armed to protect themselves, they then put out this kind of media. And, one thing I want to share, a personal story of why I am a wholehearted believer in the Second Amendment reason of being able to defend yourself is growing up in Colorado. I grew up on Lowry Air Force Base. My dad, a retired lieutenant colonel. They moved here for the Cherry Creek School District. Great place to raise kids. The school district has gone under some changes. We've talked about that a lot on my show. But at the time, it was excellent. So imagine that I had temporary insanity, went to Hollywood, and this is why I'm going to talk a little bit more about Hollywood in a second. And as I was sharing with Billy earlier, when you are an actor in Hollywood, and by the way, I'm a recovered actress in my left brain and my right mind, you tend to have, I've got my headshots, I've got my resumes, I've got my agent, I've got my manager, and I've got my stalker. It kind of seems like a package deal. But all joking aside, it was a very frightening situation when one morning the LA Threat Management Unit, a plainclothes unit, because stalking was becoming a thing that was being more well known, knocks on my door and says, "You have a problem." But here's how it sounded in California under their outrageous laws against Second Amendment rights. They basically said, "You have a problem. We cannot let you carry a gun, but if you have to, and you have to kill the guy, we'll try to make your sentence light." So really, my options were either death or imprisonment. Not a great option for anyone, especially when I'm a petite woman against a 6'6" guy that weighed almost 300 pounds. So that is why I am definitely a Second Amendment advocate. I would be anyway on principle, but personally, I understand how important that is. Now, the hypocrisy, getting back to that, Hollywood pushing all of these agendas. I've got some fun news of what's going on and the hypocrisy being revealed, because you probably missed it, but not very long ago, in the past week or so, AOC released a documentary in theaters. It's called To the End. It's all about global warming and climate change. And it made, per screen, an average of $80. So here's what I say. She has a right to make that documentary, and you have a right to vote with your dollars. Do you want to see it? Don't you want to see it? And I'm guessing you didn't see it because very few people did. But here's the hypocrisy. The same people who made that made another documentary that was called Knock Down the House. It was covering the 2018 congressional primary, covering AOC and several other very, very progressive Democrats. It received rave reviews from critics. Literally, critics gave it a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm sure you pretty much know by now that critics, the Academy Awards, are pretty much just trying to prop up those things that they want you to think you have to see, and which you're seeing less and less. Because while critics gave that one a 99% on Rotten Tomatoes, the audience gave it an 11%. And those are the people who actually saw it, who actually wanted to go see this movie about AOC's congressional race. One person said, because it was called Knock Down the House, one listener said, a knocked down, drag out snooze fest. And others said it was an extremely polarizing message. Someone else said, I feel like I must have watched a completely different movie than the ones the critics watched. It was absolutely terrible and actually made me dislike Alexandria Cortez after it was all over. I now see the audience score would say it was much more accurate compared to the critics. There you go. Your voice is being heard. You're voting with your dollars, and Hollywood's getting tuned out. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to have Adam Andrzejewski with us. It's going to be a great next hour. I'm Deborah Flora, covering for George Brauchler on News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Welcome back to The George Show. I'm Deborah Flora. I am sitting in for George, who is out for the week, hopefully enjoying himself. Great to be here. My show is heard every day, Monday through Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. A little less coffee required at that time, but it's wonderful to be here with you all today. We've already been having a great and very lively conversation, just ping-ponging back and forth between Iran, Elon Musk, school shootings, and the Human Rights Council. I think that is pretty much summing up what is fun about talk radio, because somehow they're all interconnected. If you missed any of the show or any of the shows, including mine, please go to 710knus.com because you can hear all of them. We've had some great guests. I know George has great guests and great conversations. 710knus.com. And we're going to have coming up here shortly another great guest, and that is Adam Andrzejewski. He is the founder of openthebooks.com. You know, I think it's so important because knowing the facts is important. Whatever we end up doing with them is the next step, but he uncovers a lot of different things. And one of the things that he talks about is transparency changes everything. I agree with that. One of the reasons why we ended up making a documentary, Whose Children Are They? My husband and I have 2 production companies in addition to doing the radio show and being a mom and other things like that. We did our documentary, Whose Children Are They?, which exposes what's going on in the school system. Why? Because we truly believe that Americans of goodwill and common sense, when they have information, can make decisions for themselves. That's really the importance of the public square, the public marketplace. My husband used to be a producer with Disney, and we have a day on our calendar called DLD, Disney Liberation Day. Not that it wasn't great. He worked on Marvel movies and Star Wars and all of that, but we had an opportunity to step out and begin to create things that we felt were important in the conversation. I believe everybody should be able to say what they want and speak what they want and create what they want. And then you have a choice whether or not you watch it. It's interesting because one of the things that we talk about is how your voice is actually being heard. Last quarter of last year, the Walt Disney Company lost $1.4 billion. Now, they have a right to make what they want. I do think that there's an ethical question when they are pushing agendas on children. That's why we talked about what's going on in schools. But you have a right to watch it or not watch it. And a lot of things you are not actually watching anymore. What did that lead to, by the way? And here's the good news. I always love to share the good news on my show. That's what we talk about. You know, we won't talk about something unless there's something you can do about it. Well, we can all vote with our dollars. The good news is that Hollywood, many in the culture, are actually starting to listen to the consumers once again. Yes, they'll still make their message projects and you can decide whether or not to watch it. But the CEO, Bob Chapek, was removed by the board. They brought Bob Iger back. Bob Iger had been the head of the company 2 years ago. And I don't think Bob is necessarily a conservative in any way, but he is common sense and he's a capitalist and he wants to make money for the studio. So what did he do? One of his very first acts, because the reason why Disney kind of went off the rails last year and got so engaged in politics, despite Bob Chapek wanting to not get involved at first with the Florida law that Governor DeSantis signed into law, which was basically just a parental rights bill that parents have a right to know what's being taught to their kids 3rd grade and under. And perhaps 3rd grade and under is just not the place where we should be pushing agendas on children. Let them be children. I'm going to talk about that in the final hour of the show, this war on childhood. And it was a lot of the employees within the Disney company that got all worked up, said they were going to walk out, and then that made Bob Chapek switch his position. He's a decent guy. We've known him for, over 20 years. But when you give in to the mob's never satisfied. So what did Bob Iger do when he took over Disney? He actually had a town hall with the employees, and he basically said this in a nutshell. It is time for us to stop being political. It's time for us to quiet things down, time to listen to the audience and treat them with respect and not treat them with disdain. I found those words very interesting. Listen to the audience. Why? because you're making your voice heard, because you're not seeing certain movies, because a movie over Thanksgiving that was released called Strange World, which they have every right to make. I'm not for censorship, but it was an animated movie. At the heart of it was a teenage gay romance, and the entire movie was about climate change. Now, if you want to see that, great, go ahead. But a lot of people did not know, did not want to see it anymore, don't trust the Disney studios to be having age-appropriate topics. Those are complex topics for children over Thanksgiving. Well, guess what? It tanked at the box office, and it was actually beaten out by The Chosen. The third season of The Chosen was actually premiered in theaters. And what was interesting about that is a good friend of ours, Dallas Jenkins, made that. That's made over $100 million in 2022 or 2021, I guess, when it was launched, over 100 million views. Good news is basically this. You are making your voice heard. I have a personal story about this, which is I was talking about in the last segment before the top of the hour. My husband and I did the documentary, Whose Children Are They? Going full circle now about bringing things into the light. So there is transparency. Well, what's interesting about that is I'm happy to say that our documentary made more money than AOC's. Now, it's probably not a big accomplishment. Her documentary that was about climate change made $80 per screen. So there you have it. Both kind of issue driven, both trying to bring things into the light, and just happy that it's still going strong, because that's the entire point. Transparency, the things that people don't want you to see and know, such as what we exposed with the teachers unions in that film. Well, someone who is on the cutting edge, the front line of transparency, is my next guest. Joining me on the show is Adam Andrzejewski. He's CEO and founder of OpenTheBooks.com. His findings have been aired on all kinds of national media. He's a public speaker. He was in Colorado recently at the LPR retreat, and his address at Hillsdale College post on YouTube has garnered more than 3.7 million views. More views than AOC's documentary. So joining me now on the show is Adam Andrzejewski. Good morning, Adam. How are you?
Deborah, great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. I had you on my show, and I wanted to bring you back so a different audience can hear all the great work that you are doing. So let's just start with this. You published an article in the Wall Street Journal called The Government's War on Transparency. Now, I don't think anyone is surprised that that is happening, but can you tell us a little bit more about what you have uncovered?
Well, the government's war on transparency is bipartisan. For example, you've got the Biden administration. Today, they actually redact the names of 350,000 federal employees in the federal executive agencies. Now, Deborah, you know there's about 1.4 million, way too many federal employees, federal bureaucrats in those agencies. And now 350,000 of them their names are redacted. We don't know who received, we estimate, roughly $30 billion of federal payroll that's now hidden in the swamp.
Wow, that is crazy. I remember you shared that statistic, so I'm so glad you did. I just want to pause there for a moment. Our tax dollars, which fund the government, they don't make money, they use our money, and there's a purpose for that, because the government's job is one and one thing only, to protect the rights of its citizens. But when we are paying for 350,000 people on the federal payroll that are being paid $30 billion, and we have no idea who they are or what they're doing. How does this compare to previous administrations? I mean, is this the normal number that is redacted, or is this far above?
So, Deborah, we've been collecting the federal payroll since the year 2007, and we were upset that during the Obama years, they were redacting 2,300 names from the federal payroll. Now it's 350,000, and we're going to have to file a federal lawsuit to try to get around the redactions, the names that are blacked out on the federal payroll. So we're going to have to sue them in federal court.
Well, this is crazy to me. So, by the way, Congress's main job is oversight. You know, they're supposed to be overseeing what's going on in the federal government and, appointments, all of that. Have they completely abdicated their job in this area? It sure seems like it since 2007, if it's gone up from a little over 2,000 names redacted on the federal payroll in 2007. Now it's up to 350,000. What are members of Congress saying about this when you share this information?
So at openthebooks.com, we do the job that Congress is supposed to be doing.
Thank you, Adam, for doing that, by the way.
I mean, seriously, this new Republican Congress, when you talk about a war on transparency being bipartisan, they've already taken a secret vote, 158 Republican members of the House voted to bring back the currency of corruption in Congress. That's the practice of earmarking. Earmarking is member pet projects doled out in the district to put votes on big spending omnibus, minibus expenditure bills.
Wow.
And, so the Republicans in Congress are off to a terrible start. Can you imagine Republicans who, back in the district, campaigned just a month ago on being fiscal conservatives, being outsiders, not insiders to Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
They took a secret vote. They're not even willing to put themselves on record telling you how they're going to use the scheme of earmarks to spend your taxpayer money.
Wow,
so they're off to a very bad start.
This is wrong in so many ways. I've served on some commissions, one in Douglas County. I serve on boards. I understand many of the laws, like with school board meetings and things like that. If you have 2 or more people meeting, it is a public meeting and there needs to be a record under so many laws. How does Congress get away with a secret vote? And let's be clear, this is Republicans doing this right now. First of all, is there an illegality there, or is it just simply unethical, which it is?
Well, it's unethical. It's the Republican caucus. They set their rules. The rules are lax. It's all made, all these decisions, as you know, are made on power.
Yeah.
They're not made, in the interest of the public. They're made in the special interest. And in this case, it's the interest of the incoming House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy. Earmarks exist for one reason, and that's to empower the House Speaker. That's why Pelosi brought them back, and Republicans last year took a secret vote, and 102 of them voted to empower Pelosi with the practice of earmarks.
Wow.
Now, in the bill, right now, the omnibus spending bill, sitting in front of the Senate, in front of the House, there's 9,000 earmarks in that bill. And some of the biggest porkers, 7 out of the top 10 in the Senate, are Republicans.
Oh, gosh. Obviously, you do this work, like you said, that Congress should be doing, because Congress honestly is not going to do it when it comes to their own practices. Do you have where it's listed who these 158 votes were? I guess we don't, because it was a secret vote. What can people do about that? I mean, obviously, let's make our voices heard to our representatives that we're not okay with this. I mean, earmarks, 9,000 earmarks. I remember just real quickly about the COVID bill, that in the middle of the COVID bill, thousands of pages, nearly $2 trillion. It's supposed to be about COVID. Smack dab in the middle of it was something called Family Planning for Burma, which was a kiss to Planned Parenthood. That's outrageous and wrong. What do you recommend people do when they hear this? Because this is Republicans that are doing this secret vote.
Yeah, well, first of all, go to openthebooks.com. When you come to our website, you get hit with a pop-up. Key your email address. That puts you on our breaking news list.
Great.
And we are going to release all 9,000 earmarks and the name of the member that have sponsored the earmark and have it in the legislation. And it's, like I said, it's particularly stunning. I've gone through, I did keyword searches last night just on the House earmarks. And it's, there's $300 million for trails, biking trails, walking trails. These are local projects. There's $123 million, for parks and park projects. There's $52 million that would flow for building and projects through the private entity, the YMCA. I mean, all of these are local projects. If they have merit, they should be funded locally. The federal taxpayer has no business funding, firehouses for $19 million in Kodiak, Alaska.
Oh, goodness gracious. Here's what's interesting. When I was running for the Senate, one of the things that it would have taken a lot more people than myself to do this. But here in Colorado, when it comes to ballot initiatives, they're single subject. They can only have one subject debated on its merits. And that is a good thing. I would love, if I had a magic wand, to go back in what's happening in Congress and have it be single subject. It would be a 10-page bill, a 20-page bill, not a multi-thousand-page bill, and everything would have to stand on its merit. I know people would say that would never work. It'd be too cumbersome. Actually, it wouldn't. You just have an up or down vote on things that are very clear instead of people being able to shove in their pet projects that then we don't have a say. It's really getting back to almost, taxation without representation. So that's a perfect example of the government's war on transparency. So you do amazing work. 6 historic lawsuits, 50,000 Freedom of Information requests filed. Let's talk about some of the things that you have uncovered that are the headlines. So I was telling in the last hour that you all have finally gotten Dr. Fauci's records, and whether this is illegal or unethical, we can talk about it, but he profited greatly during the shutdown. Can you talk about that and how you finally got access to his actual accounts?
So it was a knockdown, drag-out dogfight over the course of about 15 months where we had to file 4 federal lawsuits to get to the bottom of the Fauci family finances. We did this with our legal partner, Judicial Watch. And so finally we were able to tie out his ethics and financial disclosures and estimate his net worth. So in 2019, he had a disclosed financial investment net worth of $7.6 million. And by the end of 2021, that was up $5 million, up to $12.6 million. And there was 3 drivers of that increase in the net worth, Deborah. Number one was his federal pay, which is he's the number 1 most highly compensated federal employee. He out-earns the president. His wife is also employed by his own employer, the National Institutes of Health.
That's convenient. I'm sorry. I mean,
it is. They live a conflict of interest.
Yeah, my husband and I work together, but it's very clear we're both owners of the company. This is not the same as Fauci, being the number 1 paid employee, and then his wife at the national, NIH as well. Now, that's not necessarily illegal, but it's something that people have a right to know. So you're saying one of the drivers for his nearly double increase in his net worth from 2019 to 2021 was his federal pay. What were the other sources?
His investment gains in his investment portfolio. And then the third driver needs to be investigated by Congress. We've called for congressional hearings. He was able to accept, with the permission of his employer, NIH, a $1 million award from a foreign nonprofit for speaking, quote unquote, truth to power during the Trump years and for, quote unquote, defending science during the Trump years.
Wow.
Now, as a part of our lawsuit production, we had asked for his job description. And nowhere in his job description is public affairs. And yet his agency is allowing him to collect $1 million for basically PR activities.
Well, and it's interesting whenever it comes to someone who, by the way, is the most highly paid, number 1 most highly paid person in our government, taking money from a foreign government. That is something that does need to be investigated. Do you think, when it comes to Fauci, and then we're going to head to a break after this and continue to talk about some of what you've uncovered, do you think as Congress investigates this, is there something illegal there, simply unethical? What is your sense? Is there a law against that? I mean, bottom line is America needs to know, because we need to decide whether or not we think that we should employ someone with our tax dollars at that high level and look into that. Is there potentially something illegal there?
So, since 1913, there's been a law on the books called the Gillette Amendment, and it bars the publicity man. It bars the propagandist. You can't be a federal bureaucrat and be engaged in propaganda. And so with Fauci doing 400 media interviews, collecting $1 million prizes from foreign nonprofits, 400 media interviews over the first 18 months of the pandemic, not having public affairs in his job description, I think it's a real legal question as to whether or not he has violated the Gillette Amendment. And I've reached out to him. I have his work email address and asked him the request for comment if he's ever had an illegal opinion on it. And obviously, I have not heard back.
Wow. And it's so interesting. I've served on numerous boards, and boy, do we know what the guidelines are and when there's a conflict of interest and legal guidance and all of that. It's interesting how that just hasn't happened. Of course, he's not responding to you, Adam. I would be amazed if he was, but I find it interesting. You said the Gillette Amendment was 1913. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, and federal funds have to be expressly appropriated for public affairs.
Wow.
And if they're not expressly appropriated, you run afoul of it. Here's another area that needs to be investigated that really has not gotten a lot of attention. But it's our work concerning Mrs. Fauci, Christine Grady. While Dr. Fauci out-earns the president, Mrs. Fauci out-earns the vice president. And like I said, she's the chief bioethicist. She runs and heads up the largest bioethics department in the world. And while her husband, Dr. Fauci, was crafting America's healthcare response to the pandemic, she was backstopping his work with all the ethical studies. And so this needs to be explored. We asked for any conflict of interest waivers, any nepotism waivers in both of their employment files. We had to sue for it. And on the production from the lawsuit, there are no waivers.
Oh, goodness
so
gracious.
Did this run afoul of federal statutes and nepotism statutes?
And I think that's very interesting. I mean, I keep coming back to this because mine is a very small microcosm of what is ethical and what is correct and all that. You know, when you're on a board, let alone in the U.S. government, and there's a fiduciary responsibility, that's why you rarely see a board that has a husband and wife, because there is a conflict of interest. They can become one vote. And if Fauci's wife is the one providing the evidence for what he is out then propagandizing, as you said, that's a lot to look at. What I find interesting about the Gillette Amendment being 1913, that was right around the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, and they became the ultimate in propaganda machines, which totalitarian regimes have. I love that amendment because that is there to protect us from having people that are paid by the government also being the ones propagandizing their own policies. Well, Adam, we're heading to a break. When we come back, we're going to continue talking about some more of what you have uncovered and then what is being done with it and what we can do with it. So thanks for staying on the show. I appreciate it. Well, that is my guest, Adam Andrzejewski. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more with Adam of OpenTheBooks.com. He has an award that he gives out, which is Waste of the Day. You will find shocking some of the things that are in that. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation because I do agree with OpenTheBooks.com, whose motto is transparency changes everything. Time for the transparency revolution. He's doing the job that Congress should be doing. So don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're going to continue with Adam Andrzejewski. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to the George Brauchler Show. Welcome to those who are listening live, to those of you who are watching on YouTube. Good morning. I hope you're doing great. We're rocking and rolling here. Already been on the air for an hour and a half, full of coffee. Coffee's good. Coffee is my friend. I hope you're having a good cup of coffee wherever you are. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler, who is away for the week, and I hope he's having a wonderful time. Going to be with you again tomorrow as well. We've been having a great show. If you missed any of it, go to our website, 710knus.com. That's 710knus.com, and you can hear the earlier parts of the show, all of George's show, all of my shows, which are 3 to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, the Deborah Flora Show. But today I'm on the George Show, so I'm kind of George today. So anyway, we are continuing with our guest, Adam Andrzejewski. He is the CEO and founder of OpenTheBooks.com, really doing the work that Congress is supposed to do. Congress is supposed to have oversight on our government. I think one of the most startling things that was shared earlier is Adam shared that on the federal payroll right now, there are 350,000 people who are hidden. We do not know who they are. Just to put this in perspective, in 2007 under Obama, there were over 2,000. Now there's 350,000. Well, to continue to enlighten us with more information, my guest continues, Adam Andrzejewski from OpenTheBooks.com. Adam, thanks for staying on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, great to be here, Deborah.
Absolutely. Well, we're talking about, what you've been finding. Last segment, we were talking a little bit about Dr. Fauci and how you had to go through a lot of lawsuits to begin to uncover some of this. You also found out that there's a lot of connections between our scientists and China. I think some people know that. We've heard a little bit about, the NIH and some funding there, et cetera. There's something called the Los Alamos Club, and also military research went to China Institution, including hundreds of millions of PPP funds, payroll protection funds. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you've uncovered? Because, sometimes it's hard to wrap our head around what that connection is. Where have you seen this connection between, Dr. Fauci, the NIH, our scientists, and China?
So the Los Alamos Club is a club of 162 scientists that used to work for our Crown Jewel National Laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico, that since 1987, they now work in China building the latest in technologies for the People's Republic of China and not the American taxpayer. So, Deborah, think about this. We educated these scientists in our colleges and universities. We employed them in our Crown Jewel National Laboratory at Los Alamos. Oftentimes, we funded them with tens of millions of dollars worth of federal grant making. In at least one case, the scientist had top secret Q-level clearance to the nation's crown jewel secrets. And today, they're not working on behalf of the American taxpayer. They're back working on behalf of the Chinese communists in China.
Wow. And, here's the thing that, obviously we're freedom-based here and people can have the freedom to work wherever they want to. But the troubling part is when it comes to national security. Has there been in the past any kind of laws that prohibit people with top secret, high-level security information that affects our national security to not turn around and then go work for basically one of our largest enemies, to say the very least, or competitors, however you want to describe it? Is there anything there that is being ignored? Because if not, there should be something there. I mean, some of this is unethical, some of it is illegal. What is the history of this kind of thing?
So nobody can, this is the first. Strider Technologies did the underlying research and report. We highlighted it and gave it national attention. So this is the first time where the people, the places, the different technologies, through public sourcing, have been identified. And when this report hit, former senior administration officials at, for instance, the FBI said that nobody can say that this is not a national security concern, and Congress needs to hold hearings and crack down.
Yeah. Well, I agree because, we already know that they're actively seeking, some other foreign powers, our intellectual property. We've seen that. We are importing things from China that are very, very sensitive, that are in the devices that we use. This is an export of our top technology. So I'm glad you made this clear. I do hope that Congress picks up its job where you've done the first part of it and begins to, look at these things, because it does have to do with our national security. Here's another one. Now, this is internally facing. It's one of the things that we talked about on my show. That's just really startling. We know that the IRS has announced 87,000 new IRS agents. What was troubling was in the job description that they posted. The first version was much more, transparent of what they were going for, which was they literally said these 87,000 new hires should be willing to be armed and be willing to use those arms if needed. And we know the IRS is not outward facing towards external enemies. This is facing towards American citizens. You uncovered what the IRS has been spending our tax dollars on. One of the things that's a little startling. Can you share that with our listeners?
So first off, over the course of the next 10 years, Congress has appropriated, the Democratic Congress, and Biden signed it, has appropriated $80 billion to hire 87,000 more employees at the agency. Today, there's about 2,400 special agents at the IRS. The special agents have badge, arrest, and firearm authority. If you remember back in the day, these were the folks that busted Al Capone, for example.
Right.
And since 2006, our auditors at openthebooks.com have quantified that the IRS has purchased $21.3 million worth of guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. Starting in 2016, we've audited, oftentimes, we published a piece, premium placement at the Wall Street Journal in an editorial where we audited the IRS gun locker. And the most recent statistics are as follows. The IRS has stockpiled 5 million rounds of ammunition. They own 4,600 weapons, including 639 shotguns, 529 long-barrel rifles, and even 15 submachine guns. So when you reference the latest job posting for the IRS special agent, as a primary criteria for interview and hiring, you have to be willing to use deadly force. And as the tax agency in an expanding era of size, scope, and power, this is especially troubling.
It is. I think about it. It's like there's not suddenly this surge of Al Capones, and suddenly we need that much more, that many more special agents within the IRS to attack that. There's the same number. I mean, if we saw some kind of a surge in, the organized crime and those who are skirting things, and, the IRS was a unique way to take Al Capone down. They did that because they couldn't take him down in another way. That was not the original intention of the IRS. It's simply a way they used that tool. So this is troubling. Now, when you have uncovered this, which you have, what is Congress going to do about it? Are they listening to these statistics? Are they willing to, now that there is going to be at least a balance in our national federal government, what's going to be done with this information? Because this is very troubling to realize that they now have 5 million rounds of ammunition. They're ramping up 87,000 new agents that are supposed to be willing to carry guns. What happens next with this kind of information?
So already, based on our research and the media and press that we received on it, for instance, like Sean Hannity at Fox News has run 4 full segments on it just in the last couple of months, properly citing our auditors at openthebooks.com on the findings. It's been turned into legislation, and it's the Disarm the IRS bill that sits there in the hopper in this Congress. It'll have to be redone for the next Congress, but we're confident that's going to be done since Republicans will have the gavel.
I think that's really important. Disarm the IRS. I think that is a good place to start. I think a lot of people would love to get rid of the IRS, but I do know that we need, to fund our government. I just wish, by the way, it also went back to the day where you actually had to write the check. I wasn't alive then, but I heard you used to have to write the check instead of it automatically being taken out. But this is certainly one of the great services that you guys have done at openthebooks.com, because that's important to know. So Congress does its job. Well, we're heading to the break, and boy, there's always so much more that we could cover, Adam, and I'll have you back on my show, which is Monday through Friday, 3 o'clock. But what would you say to listeners? What can they do with this information? Because granted, a lot of this has to be taken care of with congressional oversight, but what can listeners do?
So come to openthebooks.com. We have virtually every single public employee's salary, name, position, and amount they made last year for every unit of government across the entire country, and especially right there in Colorado. So if you're interested in your K through 12 schools, for example, the public schools, of who makes what, even in your own child's classroom, you can figure it all out for free on our website.
That is great. You've done the work so that also citizens don't have to do the work. You made it easy for Congress. And, here in Colorado, obviously people can do Colorado Open Records Act's core requests, but you've already done so much of that work. So openthebooks.com. Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate your joining us today on the show, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing. I agree. Time for the transparency revolution. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you, Deborah.
You take care. Bye-bye. Well, that was my guest, Adam Andrzejewski. As we head to the break, I want to hear from you. Do you think the IRS should be disarmed? Do you think they should be weaponized? They are weaponized right now, over 2,400 special agents, but that is now going to grow to 87,000 plus. So do you think there is danger with an armed IRS? What are your thoughts about that? 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. Does the idea of 87,000 new armed IRS agents under an IRS that has accumulated 5 million rounds of ammunition, how does that make you feel? Do you think that's dangerous? I know my thoughts, but I want to hear yours. 303-696-1971. Don't go anywhere. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler on News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes, all in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Welcome back to the George Show on 710 KNUS. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague George, who is away for the week. I hope he's having a wonderful time. I hope you're having a great morning already. We're rocking and rolling here. Producer Billy and I have had a couple cups of coffee already, and that's going to keep us going through. These first 2 hours have gone very quickly. Coming up in the next hour, I've got a very special guest and good friend, Lieutenant Colonel, former retired Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, former Florida congressman, and he's going to be talking a lot about what is going on with the military, this recruiting crisis that is going on, the moves to stop the vaccine mandate. I personally know several people who, I'd say about 3 or 4, who really want to serve our country. But they chose not to because they chose not to be vaccinated, which is their right. There's a lot of viewpoints on that. But now that is potentially going to be lifted, I hope some really wonderful people are able to serve, because even those with religious exemptions, we're not, the vast majority, I should say, were not honored. So we'll talk about that coming up with Alan West. We're going to talk about a lot of security issues as well. He's always got a great perspective on that, especially now being in Texas, about the border and what's going on there. But in case you missed any of the rest of the show, Adam Andrzejewski was my guest, openthebooks.com, and he is doing a lot of the work that Congress is supposed to do, the oversight of what's actually going on in our federal government. I think one of the most chilling things that I can't wait to get the answers on, because he's going to take this as a lawsuit into our legal system, our judicial system, which is one of the bright spots for protecting our republic, saving our republic right now. He uncovered that there are 350,000 individuals on the federal payroll being paid over $30 billion of our tax dollars that are redacted. Over 350,000 people on the federal payroll that we have no idea who they are or what they're doing. To put that in perspective, in 2007, under President Obama, there were just over 2,000. Even 2,000 is probably too many. Now, I'm not talking about, secret operatives in the military who should not be exposed. I mean, if the Germans knew when D-Day was going to happen, my goodness, we'd have a very different history of the world. So certain things we don't need to know about what people are doing. But 350,000, that's a little bit Orwellian. I use that word a lot now because I do feel like in some areas we are in a George Orwell novel. 350,000 people. Well, thank goodness that openthebooks.com is going to take that to the courts to have that opened up. It was interesting because on my show, when I had Adam on, and my show, by the way, is Monday through Friday, 3 to 4, he shared that when they went to the Federal Reserve to ask them to share a lot of their data, the response basically from the Federal Reserve was, well, we don't have a checkbook. I find it very hard to believe that the Federal Reserve does not keep very close tabs on where all their money is being spent. And by the way, that's our money. So we do have a right to know these things. That's the important thing. And I do believe that information is powerful. It gives us the opportunity to decide what we're going to do, because ultimately, at the end of the day, the power still rests with the people. It's what happened, by the way, in the school board revolution that is still going on. Next year is a school board election year, and that is a bright spot in 2023 all over Colorado. People of goodwill and common sense are going to have an opportunity to choose who is serving on their school board. And when things became apparent, when this really, began to gain momentum, was during COVID. When children were at home, they were having school online on computers, oftentimes in the kitchen or the living room where the parents could finally see. I actually even introduced a sex ed transparency bill after they shoved comprehensive sex ed through on the very last day under the dome in Denver. It was, of course, turned down. Well, the reality is transparency is power. Once we know things, we can begin to make informed decisions. Well, coming up, we're going to have Alan West on the show after the top of the hour, so don't go anywhere. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler on News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome to the George Show. I'm not George. I bet you figured it out very quickly. George is a little bit more of the bass or baritone tones, I would think. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler, who is away for the week. I hope he's having a wonderful time. Great to be with you. My show is normally 3 o'clock, 3 to 4, Monday through Friday. Today, John Caldera will be sitting in for me because my coffee probably will not take me all the way to 3 o'clock, but it sure is making this a fun morning to be with you. So appreciate it. If you missed any of the show so far, we already have 2 hours under our belts. Please go to 710knus.com. You can hear this podcast. You can hear all of what George has talked about. You can hear my show, the Deborah Flora Show, 3 o'clock, Monday through Friday. We just had Adam Andrzejewski on the show with openthebooks.com, and he had a lot of very interesting things to share. Coming up, my guest this hour is going to be retired Lieutenant Colonel Allen West, former Florida congressman, former chair of the GOP in Texas. Is going to talk a lot about what's going on with our military, national security, the border, etc. By the way, another moniker that I have, one of the listeners did put this on here. I always tell people, if you forget my name, I grew up in Aurora. Lowry Air Force Base was where my dad was stationed. I am actually Senora Deborah Flora from Aurora. There you go. That was free for the price of admission. Been hearing a lot of great comments from our listeners. We were talking earlier in the last hour about the 87,000 new IRS agents, the fact that the IRS has accumulated 5 million rounds of ammunition, gives you pause. And we heard from Alexa. She said, "I am so confused. Shop owners are told not to pursue shoplifters. We have lowered consequences for actual criminals, such as car thieves, but we are okay with IRS agents being armed for white-collar criminals, people who cheat on their taxes. I've never been concerned about a server who doesn't report all their tips, endangering my life. I'm concerned about all the politicians who seem to make higher profits on the stock market than expert traders." I think that is a great point, Alexa. My goodness, what I shared with her back in the text is, time to become a country of laws once again and have our law enforcement, our departments of justice turn towards the actual criminals again. Having been a parent that spoke up at school board meetings and helped flip the school board in Douglas County with so many others, did not expect the DOJ to target me as a domestic terrorist when we have drug cartels who are actually terrorists on our border. Well, someone who knows a lot more about that than I do is my guest, and that is Lieutenant Colonel Allen West. He is a good friend. My husband, I've known him for a while, a man who's always willing to serve our country, both in the military, also as a former congressman in Florida and a former GOP chair in Texas. Allen, thank you so much for being on this show. I really appreciate it. Good morning to you.
Well, Senora Deborah Flora from Aurora, it's a pleasure to be with you. Merry Christmas to you and Jonathan Flora, who married the girl from Aurora.
Thank you. Wow. The way you say it, it sounds so poetic. I love it. Well, Merry Christmas.
I'm a poet and didn't know it.
Exactly. Well, Merry Christmas to you, my friend. I married into a much better last name and a great man. My maiden name was actually Riecks, German, and I grew up with people saying, "Oh, Deborah Reeks." Yes, she does. No, she doesn't. That was a lot of fun as a child. So when I got
kids can be brutal.
They can be. And so when I got something instead that sounded like floral fragrance, that was exactly diametrically opposite. But I love even more the man that came with it. So good to talk with you, my friend. And thank you for joining us on the show today.
My pleasure.
Absolutely. You've served so many areas. And by the way, you also were one of those people bold or crazy enough, like my husband, to actually jump out of airplanes. My husband's 82nd Airborne. So, there you go. Thank you for your service in that area, too.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Well, you got to get to the battlefield.
You do. And I love how on Band of Brothers, they said, you're surrounded to the paratroopers. And they said, well, we're supposed to be surrounded. That's exactly the whole purpose. So thank you for what you've done. I want to talk to you a little bit about our military because it's really in a state of crisis right now. Recruiting is at a crisis. I'm just going to let you share with our listeners, what do you believe is at the heart of this right now?
Well, I can tell you without a doubt, it's all the focus on the woke policies, more so being concerned about the proper use of pronouns, the fact that we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion office in the Department of Defense and subordinate service organizations, and we are pushing this whole thing, really cultural Marxism.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, we have a commander-in-chief that abandoned Americans to die, and 13 of them did die in Afghanistan, a horrible debacle of a withdrawal there. And then on top of that, the unconstitutional, unethical, immoral, and unlawful order that the members of the military have to get an emergency use authorization drug shot into their bodies when it really was not a threat to the readiness. And now we find out that the COVID shot is not a vaccine. Vaccines, cure diseases, but the COVID shot does not keep you from getting the COVID and the boosters and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Fauci has proved that. Joe Biden has proved that. So when you put all these things together, the lack of focus on their capability and capacity to go out and fight the nation's wars and be a credible deterrent, a lot of young men and women may want to join the military, but they're just hesitant about, is the military really there to take care of us and to take care of our families,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're looking at, 30 to 40,000 that we have said, you got to get out. Because you won't take this jab in your arm.
Well, and it's interesting because, previous numbers were less than 1% of our population served. I mean, many people here in Colorado, obviously, there's a lot of military here, but that's unusual. I mean, when we were, after Jonathan, my husband being a paratrooper, we would say, in Los Angeles, for instance, it's less than 0.0000001% because they never even knew anybody, and in that situation. But when it's that low already, and then we are getting even lower, do you think that we are at a crisis point with our military?
There's no doubt we're at a crisis point in our military, and all you have to do is understand our number one geopolitical foe, which is China. They have a larger Navy than we do at this point in time. They are making the investments by way of the fact that we have outsourced a lot of our manufacturing and technology and industry over to them, and they're turning that not into increasing the way of life of the Chinese citizens, but this one belt, one road strategy, this hegemonic domination strategy that they have, which will begin in the Pacific Rim, and they'll extend out beyond there. So, no, we don't have that strong, credible military. And I think it was Ronald Reagan who coined the phrase peace through strength, and we don't have that anymore. And Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, they see this is a time of weakness, to include Islamic jihadists. When you have an open border, there are a lot of bad things that could come from that, and of course, that's the terrorists that are coming across as well.
Yeah, it's really troubling on so many fronts. I was sharing in one of the earlier hours that we were in New York on 9/11, and we've been there many times and been there a part of those ceremonies. And we all remember right after 9/11 when that happened, this understanding that there are people that can come into our country and wish us ill intent, and we became vigilant. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And now with the border being so porous, it is as though that lesson has been completely forgotten. And, you hear these numbers of the Homeland Security, the Border Patrol, how the numbers of those that are on the terrorist watch list that they are stopping has just grown exponentially. And those are the ones they're stopping. Who are they not stopping? You obviously are a Texan. I love your Bitmoji with the cowboy hat on. We have fun with that. You are a true Texan, and the reality is you understand what's going on the border right now. Let's talk about that. We're going to go back and revisit the woke policies also, but talk to us about what's happening at the border and what would the solution be if we had a commander-in-chief that understands that this is basically an invasion, particularly by the drug cartels?
Well, first of all, you don't have a border. I mean, nothing is being done, and people are freely flowing across that border. And you just talked about the fact we've got 5 million that we have come in that we've been able to track, but you've got 1 million of these so-called gotaways. We don't know who they are, where they are, or anything. And so that has to cause you a grave amount of concern. But next week, Title 42 is going to be lifted, and I can just see busloads of people coming up and just walking right across. And this is an undermining of our sovereignty as a constitutional republic. And the Constitution is very clear and that the federal government, Article 4, Section 4, the guarantee clause, is supposed to protect every state in the union from invasion. If you've got, 500 people coming across, every other month or something like that, I get it. But when you're talking about 5 million, that's an invasion. And these aren't migrants. These are illegal immigrants that are coming to this country, and some of them with some very nefarious backgrounds and potentially intentions as well. What we need to do, if you're going to say that the cartels are narco-criminals, terrorist organizations, then you go after their funding. You go after the banks that are laundering their money. You go after the people that are here on this side of our border working with those cartels. You got to put pressure on China because really we are involved in chemical. Fentanyl is a chemical that's being shipped out of China to these terrorists down there in Mexico. They're manufacturing, they're refining, they're bringing it across, and hundreds of thousands of Americans have lost their lives. And look at that number. In 2 years, over 100,000 Americans have lost their lives. That's more than when you put together Korea and Vietnam losses of life together.
Right.
Now, those are two wars. And so the fact that Joe Biden gets on an airplane, goes to Arizona and says, I'm not going to the border because there's more important things to do, that's an impeachable offense.
Yes.
And if you want to talk about Republicans putting on their big boy and big girl pants, they need to talk about these impeachable offenses that are going on. Not just Mayorkas, but the President of the United States of America.
Oh, yes. When the Vice President, goes to Singapore, I think it was, and all over the place and never went there as well when she was supposed to be overseeing that. And then the President, you're right, very obtusely and actually incredibly disrespectfully to American families who've lost their loved ones to fentanyl. I find it interesting. Let's go back to Title 42 for a moment, and I'm going to let you explain it. But what I found interesting is even Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, has said that lifting Title 42 is bad. Now, when it gets so bad that even Gavin Newsom is disagreeing with Joe Biden about this policy, you know that we've gotten to a point where it is absolutely terrible. So talk a little bit about Title 42 just for our listeners who may not be aware.
Well, Title 42 was a policy put in place during the Trump administration that, because of the fact of the COVID issue, we will be able to, turn people back and at least make them remain in Mexico. But, of course, that's going to be lifted. And the interesting hypocrisy is that we're being told that maybe we need to go back to mass. We're being told that our members of the military still need to get, shots in the arm and things of this nature. But yet you have the President of the United States of America on 60 Minutes says that the pandemic is over. And now we're going to lift Title 42. Well, which one is the truth? I mean, you got Fauci running around out there talking about, we need to continue to press on because we're still in a pandemic. So I think that the left is confusing themselves with all of this messaging out there. And you're right, Gavin Newsom coming out and saying, hey, look, we got to stop this because he is going to get flooded as well.
Yes.
And, of course, y'all just came from California, and they just decided to give every black person out there $250,000 for reparations. And now you're going to have all of these illegal immigrants coming in that are going to want taxpayer-funded benefits. His tax base is going to flee that state.
Yeah, and it already had been. I think one of the things that was so frustrating was when Biden ended up going into the White House is that California was on the brink of collapse because of their bad policies. When we were there, and I always like to let listeners in Colorado know, I grew up here on Lowry Air Force Base. I'm not an invading Californian, but I was there for a little while. Temporary insanity, recovered actress. Best thing I brought out of there was my husband and our two beautiful children. But even when we were there, I think the statistic, if I have it correct, was about 15 to 18% of the population of California paid for everything. And I remember when Rick Perry was saying that all of these companies were moving out of California to San Antonio, not because it's more beautiful than California, but because it was such an unbearable situation. And if California had not been bailed out by the COVID bill, $2 trillion, California, others were bailed out, it would have imploded. It would have fallen in upon itself. And for Gavin Newsom to now say that California would be at a breaking point, they just keep spending our money, but this would be the breaking point thing. By the way, before we go to the break, you brought up something about California's reparations program. I always love having you share this story because, talk about the left and the woke folks confusing themselves. They're very confused. I want you to share the story real quick before we head to the break of when you were speaking somewhere and a very woke student came up to you and asked how you identified yourself. Can you share that with our listeners?
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, there are young people out there that recognize me because it's on TikTok. I was speaking at Northwestern University for Young America's Foundation, and the subject was the Iranian nuclear agreement. And I love national security and foreign policy topics, so I really felt good about it. I really nailed it. Mm-hmm. And this young lady comes up, first question she asked me is that, do you identify as black? And I mean, I was just incredulous. I was like, yes. What the Sam Hill do you mean? But this is how goofy these the woke policies are, is because they believe that your skin color, your pigmentation dictates how you're supposed to think. Yes. And I told her, look, I was born in a blacks only hospital, and last time I checked, I was black.
Oh goodness, I know there is something called reality. It's not how you identify; it's what you actually are. It's like I could identify as a tall basketball player. It does not make me a tall basketball player or someone who's able to dunk a basketball. So that I think that's interesting because they do confuse themselves and they try to confuse others, or maybe it's just the byproduct. But we're heading to a break. When we come back, Alan, I want to talk with you more about the good news of where some things are heading, especially with the vaccine mandate for the military, what we all can do, and some other security issues. So thank you for staying on the show. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
You got it. Well, when we come back, we're going to continue with my special guest, retired Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, someone who's served our country in so many different ways, including in Congress, heading the GOP in Texas. And we're going to continue to talk about some common sense solutions, how we move our military from focusing on microaggressions to macroaggressions. There's plenty of those out there, so don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll continue with Alan West. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler on News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to The George Show. I am Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler, who's taking the week off. Hope he's having a wonderful time. It's great to be with you. Hard to believe we're already into the third hour. It's going quickly. Billy in the studio, thank you for all of your producing. It's good to be here. Appreciate everyone who's tuning in on YouTube. Had some great guests already. And if you missed any of the show, go to 710knus.com. That's 710knus.com. And you can hear the podcast from also my show, which is heard Monday through Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. daily. Won't be on today. I think John Caldera is going to be sitting in for me because, as I said, my coffee will not take me until 3 o'clock. But it's good to be here this morning. Continuing with my very special guest and good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, former congressman. He was the head of the GOP in Texas, always serving our country in different ways. And now he's serving Colorado by joining me on the show and talking about some things that we all need to pay attention to. Alan, thank you so much for continuing on the show with me. I appreciate it.
It's awesome. My pleasure.
Absolutely. Well, we were talking in the last segment about this crisis in recruiting that's going on for our military, where it puts us in such a weak position. We talked about some of it is the woke policy. I mean, right here in Colorado Springs, my dad was in the Air Force. It's hard to believe that the Air Force Academy is spending its energy talking to cadets about whether or not they can say mother or father or birthing parent and non-birthing parent. And by the way, you were talking about how the left gets very confused and confusing. Last I heard, we're not even really sure who's a birthing parent or not a birthing parent, because that could be anyone. So let's talk about this.
It could be Pete Buttigieg. I mean, he had to take maternity leave. Who knows?
Who knows? It gets confusing when reality becomes so malleable. So my question is, where did this start? I mean, I've got an inkling, but where did this incredibly woke infusion start? And what can be done to turn that around?
Well, I think that the left has these people that sit down in the basement somewhere and they come up with all these whacked out policies, and then it gets into our colleges and universities. Now it's seeping down even into middle schools, but somehow it gets down into the mainstream. And you were out there in Los Angeles, and lots of times it gets out through the entertainment industry. And then, of course, the media will latch on to it, and next thing you know, it becomes part of your culture, part of the policies that you have there. And so when I look at what is happening in our military, the fact that we have allowed this, really what it is cultural Marxism, because it's not dividing us based upon socioeconomic status. It's trying to divide us upon racial status, gender status, all of these different type of things. And it really is much the same as, Emperor Commodus back in Rome. It's a distraction. It's the panem et circenses, the bread and circuses.
Yes.
That, the Biden administration is signing this thing about same-sex marriage. Well, we still have 7.1% inflation. We still have an open border. We have a military that's not meeting their recruiting goals. We're not energy independent. But again, it keeps us distracted on these very teeny tiny little ideological issues.
Yeah. And I think the thing that is disturbing is when it gets into the military. I mean, I grew up on Air Force bases. It's a tight ship and there's a direct chain of command. So this is coming from the leadership. And I remember even my dad would say that the higher up the person in the military gets, the more political the position becomes.
Oh, absolutely.
And I know you know that firsthand. So this current leadership in the military that is really pushing this cultural Marxism into our military, focusing on microaggressions and not macroaggressions. I think China must be laughing sometimes, and Putin thinking about what we're training our soldiers on. And by the way, dividing them. They're now being divided instead of seeing one another as just a fellow human being soldier that they would give their life to protect. Where did this start with the leadership in the military becoming so woke politically?
Yeah, it's amazing. You can't, tell one group of individuals in the military that they're oppressors and the other group they're oppressed and expect them to be a cohesive fighting force. Look, this goes back to Barack Obama. Obama did an incredible job of purging the senior level leadership of the military and basically saying, if you don't want to play ball with me, you get out, you retire, you resign, what have you. And so when you look at the military ranks, the last rank where you go up as an officer to be evaluated by a group of your peers is brigadier general, 1 star, or rear admiral in the Navy. After that, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star, those are all political appointments. And so when you start to look and see who are in these positions and under which administration that they rise up in, it goes back to the Obama administration. And President Trump did not do, love the guy, love the things he did for our military, but he did not correct that. He did not get rid of these, very ideological generals. And so now all of a sudden you have a Milley, you have, Lloyd Austin. I remember Lloyd Austin commanded a brigade in the 82nd Airborne Division as a colonel when I was a major. Everyone looked up to Panther 6. That was his call sign. He's not the same guy now. Who did he rise up in the ranks under? Barack Obama. Now, the good thing coming out of this election, the Republicans have control in the House. The largest committee in the House is the House Armed Services Committee. You can now start using the authorization document, the power of the purse, to get rid of these, diversity, equity, and inclusion, all this other nonsense by making sure it's not funded. And so hopefully that's one of the things that they'll do in the Armed Services Committee.
Yeah, I agree. There's some bright spots there, and I'm always telling people, because obviously Colorado elections did not turn out how people hoped, but the Congress, the House of Representatives, is a very important beachhead controlling the purse strings of government. You mentioned General Milley. It's astonishing to me. One of the reasons why I ended up deciding to run for U.S. Senate was I could not believe what happened in Afghanistan. And I tell the story that my father, who served in Vietnam, he had passed away just about a year before. And while I miss him, I was so grateful he was not alive to see that, because the images of that debacle were so similar to Vietnam, and in some ways worse, because our security was turned over to, terrorist forces that were against us. 13 brave men and women, our servicemen and women were killed. We left all this equipment behind. You know this better than I do, Alan. When you leave a theater of engagement, it's always civilians, then equipment, then the military. It's like they didn't even do the first two steps. General Milley is still the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Do you think this new House of Representatives is going to do investigations into that? Because at some point in time, if no one is ever held accountable, then nothing ever changes, and the Americans no longer trust their governance at all. What do you think is going to happen?
They have to do that, and that's one of the things that they said they were going to do. And you forgot to mention the drone strike, which they said killed a terrorist, which ended up killing, an Afghan family, a guy who worked for a non-governmental organization.
Wow.
So it was a complete debacle. And when you leave $85 billion of military equipment back for a designated known terrorist organization, that's aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. That is against, U.S. code, U.S. law. And so, again, here's an impeachable offense. So, yes, we need to get to the bottom of what really happened and question and get records and things of this nature. And so that's, again, one of the tasks that the Republicans have to do. Is, the best disinfectant is sunlight. And I think they need to bring sunlight on a lot of these things that have been happening over the past 2 years. But again, 2024, winning back the White House, you got to get the right type of people in charge of the Department of Defense, the respective secretaries of the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and then, of course, get the right type of uniformed military leaders that are there. I'm going to be very honest, I would not trust any of the senior military leaders that advanced during the Obama administration or the Biden administration to be any position of leadership in our military going forward. We need to look at some young colonels, some young brigadier generals, and boost them up and get them in the places of leadership.
Yeah, and that is definitely a rallying cry for 2024, because all that can happen right now is stopping some things, but not an actual replacement. And, we have got to do that, because China's moving at a breakneck pace. Putin is on the move. And, of course, right after the debacle of Afghanistan, that is when China made an even more bold move on Taiwan. Russia started moving towards Ukraine. I do think that they're working on stopping things. I think some interesting headlines are GOP senators say they're seeking to slow down the Department of Defense nominees until Biden answers for punishing military for refusing the COVID vaccine. As of July, the U.S. military punished 60,000 soldiers for refusing to take the vaccine and did not basically respect almost any of the religious exemptions. How do you think that effort is going to pan out, and is that bearing some fruit?
Well, this current National Defense Authorization Act had in there the end to the vaccine mandate for the military, but we also need to talk about the restitution of benefits and funds to those who have been kicked out, and restoring them back into the military as well if they want to be come back into the military. If Joe Biden decides to veto and go against that, that's a huge feather in the cap in building the case against him for 2024.
Yes.
And as well, I think that when it comes back to the House and the Senate, and Democrats are going to have to look and say, we're going to not allow that to happen. We're going to agree with the president. That builds the case against them as well. So we've got a great, horns of a dilemma. That's what we call it in the military. We got a great opportunity to put them on the horns of a dilemma because they've got to let this go. You're ending Title 42, and you're going to continue to tell our military they have to, get this unauthorized, illegal, and unethical shot in the arm. That's not going to fly.
Yeah, it's going to be something that really will be the rallying cry. And I often talk about that, the word crisis, because, we're in a crisis in so many ways. That is an opportunity. That's the other definition of the word crisis, which I love. Well, before we let you go, we're heading into the Christmas season. You're a person of faith. We've had the opportunity to go to church together with our family and loved that.
Yep.
As we are heading into the Christmas season, Hanukkah, for our friends, that are Jewish, a lot of people are a bit despondent right now. I've spoken like probably 5 different events over the last 2 weeks talking about hope. I was pointing to my reason for hope, but what would you say to listeners, hope both for our country and then, as we go into this Christmas season?
Well, I would remind them of what happened back in December of 1776 when this country was really reeling. It was on the cusp of maybe collapsing. The Continental Congress had to flee out of Philadelphia. George Washington was up there in Valley Forge, and he turned to a young man by the name of Thomas Paine, and he asked him to write a pamphlet called The Crisis. And these are the words that Thomas Paine wrote. "These are the times which try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph." And of course, you know that on Christmas Day, they crossed the frozen Delaware River and they won a battle there in Trenton, New Jersey. So that's what I want people to stay focused on. And the blessings of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually one of the things that I've been ending my talks with at these different locations, because I love that. It was the very thing. I think it's interesting that, between December 23rd and the 1st of the next year, all of the soldiers could have left, and instead they were rallied and remember why they were fighting. And yes, the Christmas season is a perfect time to remember that there is hope. I always tell people, I get my hope not just from an election, from a politician, from a policy or a ballot initiative, but from where our founding fathers did. The God who gave us our rights that are, declared in our Declaration of Independence, and those rights are from him and not from the government. So that's a great reminder. And by the way, very importantly, Jonathan just said to tell you hello and all the way.
Airborne.
Airborne all the way.
Airborne.
There you go. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your continued service in so many areas in our country and for spreading some, insight. And as you said, it's interesting because we've been talking about transparency is key, and you put it really well. Sunlight is the best antiseptic. Drag the stuff in the light so we can see it and we can make decisions based on it. So thank you so much, Alan. I really appreciate you joining me on the show today.
It's my honor, and thank you for allowing me to be with you and sharing some thoughts, Deborah. So have a beautiful and wonderful Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everyone out there in Colorado.
Merry Christmas to you, and God bless you, my friend. Take care.
Blessings. Bye-bye.
Blessings. Bye-bye. Well, that was Alan West talking about, things we can do. And I love that he shared Thomas Paine's words from December 23rd, 1776, that rallied people at a time where America was truly in its infant stage and almost died in its cradle, but it did not. And we can take heart in that way. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about that, share a couple more lines from that amazing speech. And we want to hear from you too. 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. I want to know, what do you think about the woke policies in the military, especially down at our Air Force Academy? Do you think they should be focusing on whether or not the cadets should call their parents mother and father, or birth parent and non-birthing parent? Well, that's a good question for you. So 303-696-1971, 303-1971, Don't go anywhere. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler on News Talk 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Welcome to The George Show. This is Deborah Flora sitting in for my colleague George Brauchler, who's taken the week off. Hope he's having a wonderful time. So appreciate your joining us and being a part of the conversation today. Thank you to those who are watching on YouTube. Great to have you here. Hey, it got me out of bed and made me, not just throw a baseball cap on, which is usually what I look at this time in the morning, but it is great to have you join that way, have you listening live. If you missed any of the show, and we're already winding up our third hour out of 4, is going very quickly, please go to our website, 710knus.com. That's 710knus.com. You can listen to the podcast of this show, all of George's show, and my show too, which is Monday through Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. Today, I believe it's John Caldera will be sitting in for me on my show because, as I have been saying, my coffee will not take me all the way to 3 o'clock. I think it'll take me maybe till 11, noon, and then who knows? It could be nap time for me. So my hats off to George. He does this every day, and it's a joy to be with you. Well, we just had a special guest, good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Alan West. You may know him also as a Florida congressman. He was the head of the Texas GOP, so serving many times. And I love it at the end of the program, of the interview with him, I asked him what he would want to share with all of us, because in the wake of the election, I am talking to people a lot who are discouraged, understandably so. We talk a lot on my show about the phases of grief and how we can't get stuck in any one of them, whether it's about an election or anything in our lives, because when we get stuck, especially in anger and depression, that is the downward spiral. And honestly, there are people that want to keep folks there because then people become inactivated. It's important for us to work through that. But when I've been talking to different groups over the last 2 weeks, and it's been a privilege, I want to say thank you to those with, the Cherry Creek Republican Women, Jefferson County Republican Men's Lunch. I was up in Broomfield for the Lincoln Day dinner there with the North Metro Republicans, Parker Conservatives, all these other folks, the Arapahoe County Tea Party. It's been a joy to be with you all, especially in this season. And when I asked Alan about what he wanted to share at the end, he shared the story of another Christmas time in our country's history. We faced harder times than this, and it was, of course, when Washington and the troops were camped at the Delaware River. It was December 23rd, 1776. And before I set that up, I want to say that when people have asked me, is there hope? Where do you get your hope? I always have to say, look, I actually don't put my hope just in one politician, one election, one ballot initiative or legislation. My hope is similar to where our founding fathers found it, which is the God who gave us our rights, created every single person with intrinsic value, therefore individual liberty. And that idea of America is so beautiful that there is no choice but to continue to fight for it. That is beyond just a party, although there is one party that supports that freedom much more than another. It is the crux of what has made America the truly revolutionary idea that has happened once in all of human history. And I love sharing this story because at Christmas time, we have our stockings, as many people do. And then on our family stockings, we each also have a little ornament that is somehow representational. Well, my husband has an ornament that has that famous painting of George Washington praying. And a lot of people think that that is just myth, or it is just a story. No, it's based on fact. And I love sharing this story before talking about December 23rd, 1776. That is a painting of George Washington praying at Valley Forge. And it's taken off of a recollection of a gentleman named Isaac Potts. He ran the mill in the area, and he actually stumbled across George Washington praying in the woods. And he said this, "In that woods, I heard a plaintive sound as if a man at prayer. I tied my horse to a sapling and went quietly into the woods. And to my astonishment, I saw the great George Washington on his knees alone, with his sword on one side and his cocked hat on the other. He was at prayer to the God of the armies, beseeching divine aid because it was a crisis of the country, of humanity, and of the world. Such a prayer I never heard from the lips of man. I left him alone praying." What I find interesting about that is that Isaac Potts was actually against the Revolutionary War. He owned the mill in town. He did not want the soldiers to be there encamped at Valley Forge. And after witnessing the fervency with which George Washington prayed for this country, for the troops, that America would survive its infancy and begin to grow into what we have inherited. Not exactly what we've inherited, because we have less freedom, because it's been, moved from that ideal. But the point is this: George Washington's passion, his fervent prayer, so impacted Isaac Potts that not only did he become a big supporter of the Revolutionary War, he became a senator in the new United States of America. When we have that passion, when we keep our hope and our sense of purpose, we can share it with others. And that is a very persuasive thing. We can persuade others to join us, because it's not about compromising. We stand clearly on the principles of the Constitution, but we cannot look at our fellow citizens as the enemy. If we are to grow this movement of freedom, we must realize that they are our fellow citizens. They are our neighbors, and invite them to join us. And we do that by being persuasive, by inviting them, by letting them know why America is the best idea of governance in the history of mankind for the flourishing of everyone, whether we agree with them or not. So that's an interesting story, and it ties in what Alan West shared about that fateful night on December 23rd, 1776. Well, we're heading to a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the war on childhood. We hear about a lot of other wars. This is an important one. Don't go anywhere. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to the George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague George Brauchler, who is off for the week. Hope he's having a wonderful time. Kind of an appropriate song to come in with, Running with the Devil. Well, we've been talking about a lot of things, and I'm going to talk about something coming up that really honestly kind of makes me feel that way, because I'm going to talk coming up in this hour about protecting childhood. There's a lot of things going on that honestly just make me think this is just plain wrong, gets my gumption up, gets my dander up, as I always say on my show. But before we get to that, I want to take someone who's been patiently holding on the line, because last hour we were talking with Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, and he was talking a lot about the wokeness in the military, where it comes from, the fact that so much of the military leadership has been put in place under Obama, and those are more political positions because they are actually appointed and carrying out some of those woke agendas. And we've got Chuck from Denver calling in. Chuck, thanks for calling into the George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, filling in for my colleague.
Hi, I wanted to make a comment, and I actually talked to you about a week ago on your program, kind of the same issue. But let me explain something about this woke. You know, if woke is in society, what it's basically doing is giving us an option. It's just like freedom of speech and so forth. When you bring this into the military, what happens is everyone around the world, Russia, China, North Korea, they look at this military and they say, these guys are a joke. Are you kidding me? That woke is it's a mindset. You know, you talk about good and evil, that's evil. Well, what it does, it diminishes all these freedoms that we enjoy and all these liberties. Those are a direct result of having a good military and a strong defense. What that does is compromises us. And everyone around the world sees us as a sitting duck.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm exaggerating, but that to me is the beginning of the end.
Well, and I agree with you from this standpoint as well, because when you look at CRT, which is part of the woke agenda that is coming down into the military, CRT is based on Marxist critical theory. This is just critical race theory, using race versus income and socioeconomic status. But what does it say? When people are going to be on the battlefield fighting together, supposed to be a cohesive whole, as Alan West said, what does it do? When you are being told within your own military that somebody you're fighting alongside might be the oppressor and you're the oppressed, it hardly brings us together. It divides everyone. And yes, I do think it is encouraging other forces to step in. It was right after Afghanistan that Russia moved on Ukraine, China moved on Taiwan. They're focused on macroaggressions. We're focused on microaggressions. And you even have the Saudi prince who basically completely, dissed Joe Biden, the commander-in-chief, after he went there hat in hand, basically. There is a lack of respect around the world. And when China's focusing on building, ports in the South China Sea and building their military, we're focused on, at the Air Force Academy, can you call parents mother and father? I mean, hardly a use of our military. I'll give you the last comment on that, Chuck.
I think you're spot on, but I don't think people really truly understand how serious this is. And I think that I absolutely believe all the big countries, all our flows are looking at us like now's the time to make a move.
Well, and
we'll leave it at that.
They are, when you see the things that are happening around the country. Chuck, thank you for calling in. I appreciate it. And hey, here's my question for you, because I'm going to transition into what's happening to children. The same woke policies that are going on in the military are happening in our schools. What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's a cult mindset. I mean, from the inception of this country, we knew what a man was, what a woman was, what a family was, and now they're going to redefine it. And, men can get pregnant. You got to be kidding me.
Right.
Seriously.
Right. Well,
okay.
I agree, Chuck, and we're going to talk about that now. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for calling into the show. You have a great day. Merry Christmas. Happy Hanukkah. God bless you.
God bless you.
Thank you. Well, that was Chuck calling in. And here's what I want to talk about this hour, because these woke policies, as we know, are everywhere. But I got to say, about 4 years ago, I started an organization called Parents United America. And the reason why is because I was already seeing back then how parents' voices were being ignored. It started for me when on the last day of the legislature back 4 years ago, they shoved comprehensive sex ed through on the very last day, despite hundreds of parents making their voices heard, staying there till midnight as I did. And I'll never forget the most frustrating moment was when I looked in the eyes of the legislators at about midnight when I'd waited 12 hours to share my thoughts. And I knew they weren't even listening. They shoved it through afterwards, started Parents United America. That wasn't really when everyone woke up, but it did for me because I knew what was in the comprehensive sex ed. That's why my husband and I did a documentary called Whose Children Are They? Because as people began to wake up and they realized the woke things, the CRT that was going on in schools, that woke them up over COVID. And this movement has grown. And in our documentary, by the way, we cover a lot of different topics. We tried to keep it short. I'm so proud of my husband, who's the director. He got it down to 1 hour and 59 minutes, just under 2 hours, because there were so many things to discuss and how they're all interrelated. But it leads me to this. I want to start by talking about a metaphor and where I think people of goodwill should be able to finally come together, whether you are a Democrat, a Republican, an unaffiliated, no matter what walk of life you come from. This is something I hope we can all agree with. So there is a movie called Rise of the Guardians. If you haven't seen it, it's a really nice animated movie. I always say, don't read the book. The book gets weird. It really does. It gets into aliens and all these other things. The animated feature is wonderful, and you can even watch it at Christmas time if you want to, because it does have Santa Claus as one of the characters. Now, Rise of the Guardians. Who are the Guardians? And bear with me, because this is really going to be the crux of what I want to talk about. The Guardians in this animated movie are Santa Claus, played, believe it or not, by Alec Baldwin, who Alec Baldwin can come across as one of the least likable people sometimes, but he's a wonderful Russian, strong Santa Claus. He actually has swords in his hands, full of merriment. You've got the Easter Bunny, played by Hugh Jackman as an Australian, Aussie, cool-looking, animated bunny who has a boomerang, also strong and powerful. Then you've got Tooth Fairy, which is, just a beautiful, with a bird-like appearance. And then you have Jack Frost. Jack Frost is the new guardian being added to it. Now, what is the point of Rise of the Guardians? Why are they called the Guardians? And what is it that they guard? They're called the Guardians of Childhood. And childhood in this movie is presented so well as something that should be protected, that children should be allowed to be full of wonder and innocence and joy. And in fact, each one of these guardians protects something unique in childhood. Santa Claus protects the sense of wonder in children. Easter Bunny protects a sense of hope in children, the hope that things are going to be better and that renews every day. You've got Tooth Fairy, the guardian of memories. And in this movie, those memories are really special moments for children when they need to have that encouragement, perhaps in a tough time. I forgot Sandman. Sandman is actually, believe it or not, one of the most powerful of the guardians in this telling of the story, this allegory. That's really what it is. It's an allegory. Sandman is the guardian of dreams, the dreams that children have that give them hope. And Jack Frost, played by Chris Pine, is the guardian of fun, just that sense of joy and fun. Now, who are they fighting against? Well, they're fighting against a character known as Pitch Black, representation of the boogeyman. And what is Pitch Black's goal? To replace hope with despair, wonder with discouragement, memories of joy, take those away. He actually stills the memories of the children. He wants to replace dreams with nightmares. So this allegory, this example, when I look at what is happening today in our culture, there is a war on childhood. And what I'm going to posit as my proposal here is it's time for a new Rise of the Guardian. So let me talk about this a little bit. Children And I would love if someone disagrees with me, if you really think that children and childhood should not be protected, if you think that children should be weighted down with very complex, weighty issues, sexualized topics, and all of this, I want to hear from you. If you think that what is going on right now in our culture, in our schools, is okay. 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. However, my guess is that many of you agree with me that childhood being erased as a protected time of life, that there is something deeply wrong with that. I'm going to give you some headlines. Some of them are older, some of them are newer, but I'm just going to give you some examples that are going everywhere from culture to basically, our education system, etc., to politics. Many of you know Balenciaga is a Spanish fashion house. I didn't know that before I read the story because I don't really buy these multi-$1,000 handbags. If you can and you do, good on you. It's just not normally where I spend my money. But Balenciaga is a Spanish fashion house owned by the same company as Gucci and Yves Saint Laurent. And two recent ad campaigns, one of them called their holiday campaign, have really opened people's eyes and have been very, very disturbing to many people. So let me describe their holiday ad campaign. And by the way, this has been going on for a long time. I used to talk about holidays, 7-8 years ago. I've been on radio on and off for 15 years. 7 or 8 years ago, I remember when Halloween costumes for children, I tried to buy our daughter a leopard costume because she wanted to be the actual wild cat in the wilds, enjoying make-believe. And all I found were things that looked like naughty little French maid outfits with leopard print and fishnet stockings. So when it comes to holidays, they've already begun to have been, shall I say, co-opted, distorted, and a little bit twisted. Well, the holiday ad campaign by Balenciaga, their designer gift collection, they had an ad campaign showing 6 children, young children, clutching basically what looked like destroyed teddy bear handbags. I mean, they look like you just got them out of the trash and were torn up and stitched up. And even worse, these teddy bear handbags, the teddy bears are basically wearing bondage gear. Now, here's the thing. You're an adult. You want to buy somebody a present. You can buy them whatever you want to. It's a free country. But to use children to advertise this and that connection shows how deeply disturbed our country has become in different ways, or our culture. I mean, this is an international fashion house. But this wasn't the only one. In the spring 2023 campaign, it featured, this is what's most bizarre, their 2023 spring campaign. And by the way, this is a large fashion house owned by the same company as Gucci. They literally had a $3,000 handbag in this ad sitting next to Supreme Court documents. That's a very specific choice. What were the Supreme Court documents? They were of the 2008 Supreme Court case, the U.S. versus Williams, that ruled that sharing child pornography is illegal and not covered under the First Amendment. So they had this $3,000 bag next to Supreme Court documents all about child pornography. And another little hidden Easter egg, if you want to call it that, was a book about a Belgian artist whose work include paintings of toddlers in all kinds of situations I don't even want to describe. I just won't even go there. Your imagination probably fills in the dots. So the artist who they feature in this, his work is described as toddlers engaged in playful but mysterious acts with sinister overtones and insinuation of violence. Okay, this is an ad campaign. Now, the good news is that people have spoken out. That's the good news. There's still the vast majority of people that have a sense of decency, that if we cannot agree that childhood should be protected, then honestly, there's not really a starting place for a conversation. Why do I bring this up? well, this is happening in different parts of our culture. I am going to talk after the break about what we can do about it and the gains you're already making. But it's time to come together and say children are off limits. Obviously, this is going to lead to the larger conversation of what's going on in schools, what's going on with the teachers' unions, what's going on in a lot of other areas. But let me share another story with you. In California, and I hate to say this, but what happens in California oftentimes makes its way across the country and permeates. And the monolithic one-party rule under the dome in Denver right now seems to want to make us be Neo-California, California 2, whatever we want to call it. We need to be aware of what's happening. In California, it has just been released and reported that California is found to be releasing pedophiles the same year they were incarcerated, sometimes within a few weeks or a month or two. The bottom line is this: I remember or have heard that pedophilia was rightly understood to be the most horrific offense that someone could make, to the point where those who have committed pedophilia, when they go to prison, know they're going to have an incredibly rough time, because even the criminals that are in prison understand that no matter what crime they committed, even if it's murder, the worst thing you can do is rob the innocence of children, hurt them. Well, in California, more than 7,000 sex offenders were convicted of pedophilia with children under the age of 14, and they were let out of prison within the same year or within months. There are pushes to make this sort of thing more normalized. Guess what? Time for a rise of the guardians, and that is you and me. And this is an area where we can make a huge difference. The revolution that started in school board meetings and over COVID is continuing, because people of every walk of life, be they Democrat or Republican, be they liberal or conservative, unless they are on the crazy fringe, understand that what is going on in our schools is wrong. And we can help connect the dots, because when we realize how damaging this is, we can stand up to it. Now, we're going to head to a break. I want to continue this because this is a lot of places in our culture, but we are making a difference there. And I actually think this is the area where we're going to turn this entire ship around, because people of goodwill understand those that are trying to use our children as political pawns, trying to turn them into mini activists. And I'm going to share the information about the No Place for Hate program that is in many school districts. Even it was in our Douglas County School District until they finally got rid of it. That sounds really good. But at the heart, what is behind that? They want to turn children into political activists. We know that sex education has gotten pushed down from middle school all the way down to third grade. Why is that? Because there's something that happens in children's developmental thinking around the age of 8 or 9. Guess what? Just happens to be third grade. Children younger than 8 or 9 have what is known as concrete thinking. You tell them something, they absolutely believe it when it comes from a trusted adult, or they just hear it somewhere else. That is why they have the wonder of Santa Claus and Tooth Fairy and Easter Bunny. They believe it. They do not do critical thinking. Over the age of 8, children begin to develop critical thinking, which means you can tell them something and they think, well, maybe that's true, maybe it's not, maybe it's true of this person, not of this person. That's why the agenda to push gender identity politics, critical race theory politics, all of these things younger than the age of 8 is a real agenda, and we need to look at it. Now, many people who are part of this occurring maybe think they're doing a good thing. Maybe they think that somehow this is going to stop bullying. But the reality is those who are really behind it are pushing this agenda for a reason. That's why I agree with Mike Pompeo. I'm going to share more of this when we come back from the break. Who did he say was the most dangerous person? Mike Pompeo? former head of the CIA, former Secretary of State, who has seen the worst of the worst of the worst. No, it wasn't the leader of North Korea. No, it wasn't some terrorist organization. It was actually Randy Weingarten, the head of one of the largest teachers unions in our country, because of what they are doing to children. When we come back, I do want to hear from you, 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. If any of this has you hot under their collar, want to hear from you because we're going to continue this conversation. I'm going to give you more examples, but most of all, we are going to talk about what we can do about it. So don't go anywhere. Time for the rise of the guardians. Time to stop the war on childhood. Time for everyone of goodwill to say that children are just off limits. Not just my kids, not just your kids. Everyone's children should be off limits when it comes to these topics. When we come back, we'll continue this conversation. 303-696-1971, 303-696-1971. Want to hear from you. We're going to continue with this. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague George Brauchler, who is on vacation. Hope he's having a wonderful time. Don't go anywhere. This is News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to the George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague, George Brauchler. You can hear my show Monday through Friday, 3 to 4 p.m. But good to be with you this morning. I'm going to be joining you this time tomorrow as well. Boy, it goes by quickly, especially with the great callers and guests, and obviously the great Billy in the in the studio as well. We've been talking about a time for a new Rise of the Guardians, referring to the animated movie that deals with the guardians of childhood. This is something where we cannot stand by and just let this happen. It's why actually my husband and I spent 2 years, over 100 hours of footage, interviewing people all across the country for our documentary, Whose Children Are They? Because it's exposing what's going on in our schools, really honestly, with many of those people who think the children belong to the state or the educators or those who want to indoctrinate them or those who want to use them for their political purpose. In fact, if anyone listening has any doubt about the inappropriate, just raunchy material that's being taught to children 8 years old and sometimes younger in the guise of other types of education, you know, our documentary, the part that covers sex education in our schools, would be R-rated or possibly even NC-17 if we went through the rating system. Not because of anything we added, but because we simply showed what children are being taught. We put a warning before that section. And in fact, one mom who got up in a school board meeting and just read from the curriculum was told by the school board to stop because it was inappropriate. Yes, it is inappropriate. It's inappropriate for adults. It's inappropriate for children. Hey, if you're an adult, you know, you're free. Whatever you want to, read, as long as it's not child pornography, because that is absolutely heinous and rightfully illegal. But it's inappropriate for children. Well, we are getting lots of calls on this. I want to take Joe from Arvada. Joe, you were on the George Show with Deborah Flora.
Hi, Deborah. We saw you at Assembly. It was awesome.
Oh, thank you, Joe.
Well, this will go on until, you know, they cut the proverbial head of the snake off. You think about this, Joe Biden and Hunter Biden are put on a pedestal as the leaders of our country, and honestly, it's the pedophile family in chief. There has been documented evidence of Hunter, and then Joe, his own daughter says that he showered with her. The point is that until the politicians stop advocating for pedophilia, we're not going to get anywhere. If you look at last week, Joe Biden had a drag queen show at the White House. Several of the drag queens, their own texting and social media shows that they prefer, sex acts with children.
Right. Well,
also, Joe Biden is sponsoring the open border situation, which is a huge sex trafficking issue for unaccompanied minors that are being placed with, other cartel members or supposed family members that are really just using these children for sex trafficking.
Well, and Joe, yeah, and thank you. We've got several callers on the line. I appreciate your calling in. I'm going to address several of those things. So thanks for calling in to the show. And one thing that I would say is, if we're going to cut the head off the snake, so to speak, unfortunately, this issue is more like Medusa, because this is coming from several different places. And yes, we need to uncover things that are going on with Hunter Biden, what's going on with any of our elected officials. Certainly, one of the places where this did get pushed was under the Obama administration, and Joe Biden obviously being a part of that, was why do we have in schools basically enforced showering where 14-year-old girls are forced to shower next to anatomical males? That was a part of what came out of the Biden administration, where they said, if you do not do that, we will take away your federal tax dollars. But it's also coming from the teachers' unions. It's also coming from many other places. It's coming from our media. When we were standing up against the comprehensive sex ed bill, which is comprehensive in that it actually taught children to consent to sex, not what was going on biologically in reproduction. There was one 12-year-old girl who got up and she said, you know what? I'm sexualized everywhere. Everywhere I look, I see sexualized imagery of children. It's on the TV. It's on videos. It's everywhere. Can I not have one safe space where I can go and be a child? And when it comes to the drag queen situation, as we know, permeating, the schools and the libraries, and the National Library Association is actually pushing this. By the way, Kirk Cameron was told by many libraries he couldn't read his book about faith and hope, but those are many of the schools that allow the drag queen story time. The bottom line is this: drag queen shows are adult entertainment. If someone wants to go to that as an adult, that is fine. But I know many people within the LGBT community who talk about that is not for children any more than a heterosexual burlesque show would be appropriate for children. So that needs to cease and desist. And guess what? They're our children. They're our grandchildren. We are the ones that can stand up and say enough. We did not abdicate our rights. We did not abdicate our ability to have a voice in the schools, in the political system, and everywhere that this is happening. Well, continuing with the great callers, I have Jennifer from Denver. Jennifer, you are on The George Show with Deborah Flora. Thanks for calling in.
Good morning.
Good
Deborah.
morning.
It's so great to hear you in the morning.
Oh,
there are a lot
you.
of people that could have filled in for George, but I was so pleasantly surprised to hear your voice and hear you talk about these topics this morning. So thanks for getting up early and doing that.
Thank you. My pleasure. I love coffee. Coffee is my friend, and good to be here with you this morning. So Jennifer,
Better things are powered on coffee.
Yes, they are indeed. In fact, I have a Christmas mug that says, all I want for Christmas is coffee and a nap. I think they're great. They go together hand in hand. So Jennifer, thanks for calling in. What's on your heart?
Well, it's interesting listening to you, and I could go a lot of ways with this conversation, but I am a mom who has raised 2 children into adulthood, just recently flown the coop, and really proud of them. But I got to tell you, it was a battle, and especially in those teenage years when kids are trying to develop their own thoughts, trying to develop their own identities, they are particularly vulnerable to the messaging that's coming at them. And there is a tendency, and I'll admit this in my own self, is that once you have raised your children, perhaps you want to wash your hands of it and say, not my battle anymore. And we can't do that.
No.
We cannot do that because these children are growing up to be our neighbors, our community members, and our leaders.
Yes.
And so I think just listening to you this morning, it reawakened something in me that perhaps I need to be more involved. So just enjoyed listening to you.
Yeah, and Jennifer, I so appreciate that. I actually think, and what I've been seeing in even this school board revolution, as I call it, where parents are waking up, a lot of time it is the grandparents who are making the biggest difference, because sometimes grandparents, I don't know if you're a grandparent yet, but we all have a vested interest in what's going on in our schools. First of all, it's public, taxpayer funded. It is the future of our society. Sometimes those whose kids are no longer at home have more latitude, both time-wise and energy-wise. And also sometimes parents are afraid to speak out because their children get, ridiculed at school, sometimes get persecuted by the educators because of it. So I wholeheartedly appreciate your saying that, Jennifer, because this is for all of us. We are the guardians of childhood. And when you hear these stories anymore with kids, many of them, why are there, mental health crises and all this? They're being completely exposed to things that no child should have to deal with. So I appreciate that. I'll give you the last word, Jennifer.
Well, no, I am not a grandmother yet. Thank goodness. I don't think I'm quite ready for it. But I will encourage parents out there. They just have to be really smart in their parenting.
Yes.
And really in those teenage years, perhaps not overreact when the kids say something completely off the wall, but teach.
Yes.
We have to continue to teach.
I agree.
So anyway, thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thanks for calling into the show. I appreciate it. Merry Christmas to you.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Well, Jennifer brings up a great point, because here's the good news. I remember when all of this was first coming out, and one of the most heartbreaking stories I heard was the very first place I heard about this happening with, gender fluidity being taught to kids was about 4, maybe 5 years ago in a place called Rockland Academy. It was in California, of course. Things seem to start there. And just to be clear, by the way, transgenderism, gender fluidity, all of that is not considered to be a part of sex education. So they can teach it at any age, and they teach it all the way down to preschool. Well, this mom came on my show and she talked about how this came about. So she sends her daughter off to kindergarten, her 4-year-old daughter. I remember the first time I dropped our kids off at kindergarten. That is a time where you take your precious child and you say, I am trusting them in this room with these folks to protect them. That's really the number one thing. And in kindergarten, you're thinking, well, they're going to learn to be socialized, color, and be potty trained. I mean, that's really all it's supposed to be about. She brought her daughter back from kindergarten, gave her a bath. That night, her daughter's hair was slicked back. After the bath, her daughter looked in the mirror, 4 years old, started trembling and shaking uncontrollably. And she looked at her little 4-year-old girl and she said, what's going on? And the little girl looked at her and said, Mommy, I just became a boy and I didn't want to. The mother had no idea what was going on, had to push and push and push to find out that in her daughter's kindergarten class that day, there was a transitioning ceremony for one of the students. They read I Am Jazz, which tells children, as I said, who have concrete thinking, you may have a boy brain trapped in a girl body or vice versa. And none of the parents had been notified except for the parents of the child who transitioned. Other children in that class, there was a little boy I heard the story of, who refused to go to sleep. He tried to stay awake as long as he possibly could because he loved stuffed animals and he thought if he fell asleep, he would wake up as a girl. Now, can we come together as people in a society protecting children and say, if your goal is really to stop bullying, because that's what they say. They say children who are gender confused shouldn't be bullied and should have support. Any child that is dealing with gender fluidity should be supported. But if you want to stop bullying, all you have to do is tell children this. Well, Saeed is Sikh. He wears a turban. Don't tease Saeed. Susan is Catholic. She has ashes on her forehead. Don't tease Susan. Billy is now going to be Marie. Don't tease Marie. That is it. You do not have to teach them about Catholicism, about the religion of Sikhism. You do not have to teach them about what gender fluidity is. You just tell children to be kind to one another. And by the way, why is the rallying cry of the far left trying to implement programs in our school to move beyond kindness? That's what they say. Time to move beyond kindness. I don't agree with that. It is time for the rise of the new guardians. But here's the good news. When I had that mom on the show who talked about how she was blindsided and had not been given the opportunity to talk to her daughter about it, we can do that. If you're a parent right now with young children, I would encourage you 2 things. Number 1, automatically opt out of any sex education that's being taught, because right now it is not reproductive biology. It is teaching children every way to have sex and how to consent to it. That is pretty much the playbook right now. And I would also say you can inoculate your children's hearts and minds. I had a children's psychology expert on the show one time, and he said that we can have these conversations with our children first. We can talk to them first about what they may be hearing, and it can be something like, well, you're gonna meet children who, say that they were a boy and now they're a girl. That is what their situation is. I know that you are fearfully and wonderfully made just as you are, and you can encourage them in advance. You can inoculate their hearts and minds. That's something we can do. When we come back, I'm fired up. Heading into the break late. Can't help it. It is time for the Rise of the Guardians. But when we come back, I'm going to close this show out with talking about many other things we can do. Because we are the guardians. We are the ones that are going to say childhood is a protected time of life and you cannot steal it anymore. That's what we can do. I'm going to give you some great ways and some wins that are already happening. So don't go anywhere. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague George Brauchler on News Talk 710 KNUS. Welcome back to The George Show. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for my colleague George. What a great song to get us going into the rest of the day. Boy, I can't believe how quickly these 3 hours have passed by. I am going to be here again tomorrow. Looking forward to it. My show heard Monday through Friday at 3 o'clock. I will not be on today because, as I've said, my coffee will not take me that far. I'll probably be enjoying a little nap around then. But tomorrow we're going to have a great show. I'm going to have with us Helen Raleigh. She is an expert on what's going on in China, having grown up and lived there. And she's going to share some insights on what is happening with the riots. I'm going to have Dr. Alveda King, also a longtime friend, talking about some of the top issues of the day. So looking forward to being with you tomorrow. But right now, we've been talking about a time for a Rise of the Guardians, referring to the animated feature where the mythical characters of childhood, Santa Claus, Tooth Fairy, Sandman, Easter Bunny, and Jack Frost, all protect childhood. I don't know about you, but I am sick of people thinking they can rob children of their innocence, of their wonder, of their hope, and instead make them have to deal with adult complex issues that they should never have to deal with. Well, gotten some great callers, and right now we have Dolly on the line. Dolly from Littleton, you are on The George Show with Deborah Flora. Thanks for calling in.
Well, thank you. I'm elderly, and I'm 91 now. And what I found out within the last 8 years, and when Governor Lamb came on duty, he had a whole list of things on the internet. They took the books out of the library, and I remember they were selling them. They stole all the books in the library except the bad ones, the filth ones, and then they were put in. There was a listing of all the names of all these books. Were just horrified what's going on now. And they are not only here, but this was done in Vancouver, BC, about the same time, because I go up there visiting my family, and we went to the library. The same thing there. You go in the library, you couldn't find any decent books.
Right.
And so this has been going on some time here within the last 7 years.
Yep. It has. And Dolly, thank you for sharing that, because the libraries are a place where we have to take a stand. I really appreciate that. And I'm going to, because we're heading towards the end of the show, I'm going to let you go, Dolly, but hope that you have a wonderful Christmas. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Well, as Dolly was saying, what's happening in the libraries, every parent should know what are in the libraries in your kid's school. Here's a little fact. And this is absolutely would be a really quick way to take care of this entire issue. Most schools are actually exempt from obscenity laws, believe it or not. And for much of what is taught in the name of sex education, they have to take the filters off of computers. I don't know about you, but as a parent, one of the first things that we did when our children started having access to the internet is put all sorts of filters on it. It's not just in our public school libraries, it's in the libraries all around. In fact, the new head of the National Library Association, I don't have her name right in front of me, but she was so excited because she talked about how, being a member of the LGBT community, she could not wait to change the thinking of students. Now, here's the thing. That is fine for her to be part of whatever community, but that is not the job of the libraries to change the thinking of students. And some of the books that are out there are absolutely pornographic. They really are. This is not censorship. This is not prudism. I have that. We put this in our documentary. Whose children are they? You don't believe it? Check it out. Share it with your neighbors and your friends, because here's the good thing. There's a lot we can do. Next year is a school board election year. I want you to think about this. First of all, if you're someone who can run. But what you need to do is ask one question. Does that school board member take money from the teachers' unions? Because if they do, that's who they are working for. The other thing that's happening is you're making your voice heard in the media. Disney lost $1.4 billion last year, right after one of its executives said they wanted at least 50% of all characters to be from the LGBT community. For children, let's let children be children. I know together we can stand up for their innocence and stand up for the other things that really matter. That's why it's been so great talking with you today. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Deborah Flora, sitting in for George Brauchler, News Talk 710 KNUS.